We trust the neighbors who join our search parties and the journalists who report the details of a crime. But on rare occasions, the person offering the most comfort is the one responsible for the nightmare. How far will a predator go to stand at the exact center of the tragedy he created? The air inside the regional police station in Kijevo, Macedonia, feels heavy and thick in June 2008. Detectives sit across a metal table from a respected local reporter named Vlado Tanitsky. They hand him a sterile cotton swab to collect a genetic sample. For 3 years, Tanitsky has commanded the front pages of the national newspapers, writing the most detailed, intimate articles about a serial predator haunting the region. The community trusts his words, viewing him as a crusader seeking justice for the fallen women. Now, the investigators stare at the mild-mannered journalist, a chilling realization forming in their minds. They are testing a terrifying theory. The dedicated reporter chronicling the monster is actually the monster himself. The municipality of Kichiro rests in a valley surrounded by dense forests in the western part of Macedonia. Cobblestone streets wind through old neighborhoods where generations of families live side by side, creating a tight, trusting community. Sodium streetlights cast long shadows over the quiet corners during the dark winters. Vlado Tanitsky spent 2 decades walking these streets as a municipal reporter for prominent national newspapers like Nova Makedonja and Turinsky Vetsnik. He carried a leather satchel and a notepad, establishing himself as a fixture at local cafes and town meetings. His colleagues considered him quiet, persuasive, and knowledgeable about the daily rhythms of the town. Citizens felt comfortable speaking with him about their grievances, trusting his mild demeanor and attentive ear. He projected the image of a dedicated family man, working steadily to provide a quiet, stable life. Behind the respectable public facade, a series of dark personal fractures began to divide his reality. His childhood home sat on the edge of town, harboring severe psychological wounds rooted in family discord. In the year 2002, his father retreated into despair and ended his own life. Just months later, his mother suffered a fatal accidental overdose, leaving a profound void and complex emotional scars. The string of family tragedies isolated Tanitsky, stripping away his remaining emotional anchors. In 2003, a wave of corporate restructuring hit the newspaper industry, resulting in a devastating layoff. At the same time, his wife secured a major career advancement that required her to relocate to the capital city of Spoke. Tanitsky remained behind in the empty family home in Kijevo, brooding in the silence of the valley. The solitude amplified his long-held resentments against older women who resembled his late mother. The crisp autumn air turned bitter cold by November 2004, forcing residents of Kijevo to bundle up for simple errands. Mitra Simeonowska, a 64-year-old cleaner, stepped out of her warm house to visit the local market. She walked the familiar route down the paved avenue, a path she took nearly every single day. She never returned from the market, vanishing without leaving a single trace behind on the asphalt. Panic spread through her family as the hours stretched into days, prompting them to file missing person reports at the local precinct. Investigators canvassed the market stalls and knocked on neighborhood doors, finding no witnesses to her sudden disappearance. The police possessed limited resources, operating out of a small precinct, unaccustomed to complex predatory crimes. Bureaucratic protocols stalled the initial search efforts, categorizing the case as a routine runaway despite her stable home life. Tanitsky watched the panic unfold, positioning himself at the center of the frantic community response. The grim reality broke through the winter frost on January 12, 2005. Searchers walking through a desolate, abandoned construction site near the edge of town made a chilling discovery. The lifeless form of Mitra rested discarded among the concrete rubble and frozen weeds. A thick telephone cord remained wrapped tight around her neck, leaving deep indentations on her skin. Forensics teams documented the brutal scene, noting the extreme physical trauma and the distinct ledger method. Taunting arrived near the perimeter line, observing the commotion with a calculated, steady gaze. He pitched the story to his editors, securing front-page placement with remarkable speed. His articles captured the grief of the community while injecting specific details about the crime scene. The residents devoured his reporting, unaware that the predator dictated the narrative they read over their morning coffee. Law enforcement officials grotoned off the construction site and gathered physical evidence. But their internal communication systems proved fundamentally flawed. Detectives placed the forensic reports into paper files, storing them in metal cabinets without digitizing the critical details. The regional police lacked a centralized database, preventing them from cross-referencing similar unsolved cases across different jurisdictions. For 2 entire years, the investigation into the loss of Mitra gathered dust while detectives chased useless tips and false leads. Officers interviewed local vagrants and petty thieves, wasting hundreds of hours on individuals with airtight allies. The precinct commander restricted information flow to the public, believing silence would eventually draw out a suspect. During this massive gap in time, Taunting continued to walk the streets of Kitsevo, attending press conferences and asking pointed questions. He sat across from grieving relatives, recording their tears in his notebook with feigned sympathy. The systemic failure to digitize case files allowed a dangerous man to operate freely under the guise of an investigative reporter. The quiet town fell into a false sense of security until November 2007. Nuvaika Laska walked down a quiet residential street, heading toward a relative's house just a few blocks away. The predator intercepted her path, pulling her into the shadows and stealing her future in a swift, violent motion. Her family reported her missing, triggering another wave of frantic searches through the damp autumn forest surrounding Kitsevo. Taunting stepped right back into his role, offering his platform to the desperate family members. He visited the home of the missing woman, sitting on their living room sofa and pressing them for intimate details. He manipulated their vulnerability, forcing the relatives to relive their worst nightmares while he scribbled notes. The police treated the new disappearance as an isolated event, failing to notice the clear demographic similarities between Luvika and Mitra. Both women worked as cleaners, shared a similar age bracket, and possessed physical traits mirroring the mother of the journalist. The freezing weather broke in February 2008, revealing the tragic fate of Luvika. A local resident walking near a remote ravine outside the city limits stumbled upon her remains. Investigators arrived to find the scene mirroring the previous horror with terrifying precision. A familiar telephone cord served as the instrument of her demise, wrapped tight and knotted with identical tension. Detectives stood over the frozen ground, finally connecting the 2 cases and officially declaring the presence of a serial attacker. Panic gripped the municipality, causing residents to lock their doors and avoid walking alone after sunset. Taunting wrote fervent articles demanding police accountability, positioning himself as the voice of the terrified citizens. He highlighted the incompetence of the investigators, blasting the local precinct for failing to protect the vulnerable women of Kitsevo. His stories contained intimate descriptions of the grief echoing through the town, building a massive readership. The nightmare escalated with terrifying speed just 3 months later. In May 2008, Zivana Damakoska left her small stone house to run a quick errand, walking under the bright spring sun. She disappeared from the paved sidewalk, swallowed by the predator in broad daylight. The police mobilized resources, scouring the nearby fields and abandoned structures with canine units. They located Zivana mere days later, finding her body discarded near a local football stadium. The signature telephone cord remained present, solidifying the terrifying pattern of the attacker. Taunting reached out to the sister of Zivana, securing an exclusive interview that made national headlines. He sat across the table from the grieving woman, offering a comforting hand while asking probing sadistic questions about her pain. He reveled in the psychological control, watching the family shatter while he held the pen that would broadcast their misery to the world. The relentless stream of articles published by Tanetsky eventually caught the attention of a sharp-eyed investigator reviewing the press clippings. The detective sat at his wooden desk comparing the official crime scene photographs to the text printed in Nova Makedonija. A chilling discrepancy leaped off the page, exposing a massive flaw in the narrative crafted by the reporter. Tanetsky described the specific type of telephone cord used to bind the victims in his latest publication. The police command had withheld the detail about the telephone cord from the press and the public. No official press release or police spokesperson had ever mentioned the exact nature of the ligature. The detective dug deeper into the archive, realizing Tanetsky pitched his stories with unprecedented speed, often submitting drafts before the bodies were formally identified. The realization hit the precinct like a physical blow, shifting the entire focus of the investigation. The trusted confidant of the families held information that only the true perpetrator could possess. Detectives moved with complete silence to trap their suspect. They secured a warrant for genetic testing on June 20, 2008. Plainclothes officers intercepted Tanetsky on a busy street and escorted him directly to the local station. The atmosphere inside the interrogation room felt suffocating as technicians processed the buccal swab. The results returned a definitive match. The genetic material recovered from the tragic victims belonged entirely to the mild-mannered journalist. Officers placed heavy steel cuffs on his wrists, the metal clicking with absolute finality. The mask of the sympathetic reporter shattered completely. The predator stood exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the regional precinct. A specialized search team deployed to the rural cottage owned by the family of the journalist. The structure sat deep in the woods, isolated from the prying eyes of the main town. Officers breached the wooden door, stepping into a localized house of horrors. Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights as they swept the dark interior. They discovered a hidden cache containing spools of telephone cord matching the exact make and model found on the victims. Investigators pulled personal items belonging to the deceased women from concealed floorboards and dusty shelves. Notebooks filled with frantic writings detailed the specific routes the victims took on the days they vanished. The physical evidence cemented the terrifying truth of the dual life he led. He hunted the women, ended their lives, and then built his career off the ensuing grief. The local prosecutor formally charged Tanetsky with the brutal attacks on two of the women. Detectives kept the investigation open, preparing a third case based on the overwhelming physical evidence recovered from the cottage. He sat in a cold concrete holding cell awaiting his transfer to a maximum security facility. The judicial system prepared for a massive, highly publicized trial that would expose his psychological manipulation. On the morning of June 23, 2008, guards walked down the quiet cell block to deliver breakfast. They peered through the iron bars and made a grim discovery on the cold stone floor. Tanetsky lay motionless, having drowned in a plastic bucket of water left for sanitation purposes. The coroner ruled the event an intentional act to escape facing his own crimes. He took his final secrets to the grave, robbing the families of a public reckoning. The citizens of Kichivo grappled with a profound sense of betrayal in the aftermath of the shocking revelation. The families of the victims realized they had poured their hearts out to the very monster who caused their endless pain. The legacy of Vlado Tanetsky serves as a chilling reminder that predators often hide behind a facade of public trust and professional authority. Systemic failures in cross-jurisdictional communication allowed a master manipulator to control the narrative for years without suspicion. The town slowly healed, but the scars left by the journalist remain etched into the community history. His ability to hide in plain sight highlights the terrifying reality of monsters wearing normal faces, However, the audacity of mocking the police through written correspondence is a tactic shared by other notorious figures. In February 2005, another respected community leader handed detectives a seemingly untraceable floppy disk, unaware that hidden digital footprints would soon shatter his own carefully crafted double life. February 16, 2005, deep inside a Wichita, Kansas police interrogation room. Detectives sit across the table from a balding, mild-mannered church council president. The man smirks at the investigators. He believes the purple floppy disk he recently mailed to a local television station is completely untraceable. He feels utterly invincible, convinced his decades of outsmarting law enforcement remain perfectly intact. He assumes the authorities are simply wasting his time. But within hours, hidden digital footprints buried deep within the deleted files of that very disk will expose his darkest secrets and shatter his double life forever. Park City, Kansas, rests just north of Wichita, defined by sweeping plains, quiet cul-de-sacs, and working-class families seeking quiet lives. The sprawling Midwestern landscape offers a wide, open horizon, yet hides secrets behind the heavy wooden doors of suburban homes. Here, Dennis Rader built the perfect suburban camouflage. He lived as a married father of two, tending to his lawn and waving to neighbors under the glow of sodium streetlights. He led a local Boy Scout troop, guiding children on camping trips through the Kansas wilderness. He sat in the front pews of Christ Lutheran Church, eventually rising to the esteemed position of congregation president. To the outside world, Rader embodied civic duty and moral uprightness. His neighbors viewed him as a pillar of the community, someone who enforced the rules and kept their streets safe. Not a single person walking past his well-kept home suspected the profound darkness lurking behind his mild, spectacled eyes. The community trusted him, implicitly unaware that this trust provided the ultimate cover for a predator. In 1991, Rader secured a position as a compliance officer for Park City, an occupation that granted him authority, a uniform, and a reason to patrol the streets at all hours. He drove a white municipal van, methodically cruising through neighborhoods and writing citations for overgrown grass or unleashed dogs. He relished this meager power, frequently harassing citizens over minor infractions with a rigid, unyielding demeanor. The city boundaries provided his hunting ground. He used his official role to map out escape routes, monitor police response times, and identify vulnerable targets. Homeowners often watched him measure the height of their hedges, entirely oblivious to the reality that he was actually studying the layout of their properties and the strength of their door locks. This job allowed him to knock on any door without raising suspicion. His badge and uniform acted as a psychological shield against any scrutiny from genuine law enforcement. He moved through the community with chilling ease, weaponizing civic ordinances to feed his absolute need for control. His professional life became a carefully constructed extension of his darkest obsessions. The nightmare officially began on a frigid morning in January 1974, focusing on a modest single-story house on Edgemore Street. Inside, the Otero family prepared for a routine weekday, completely unaware that their lives were about to meet a permanent and horrific end. Rader severed the telephone lines behind the house, physically isolating the family from any potential rescue. He forced his way inside, cornering the parents and two of their young children in the narrow hallway. What followed was a calculated exercise in psychological torture and absolute dominance. He systematically bound his victims, ensuring they felt complete helplessness as he subjected them to unimaginable terror. The discovery of their lifeless bodies sent an unparalleled shockwave of panic through the quiet Wichita neighborhoods. Residents frantically purchased heavy deadbolts, barred their windows, and kept their children locked indoors as the sun went down. The devastating loss of the Otero family marked the inception of a terrifying era for the entire region. The predator had officially announced his presence, leaving behind a profound void of answers and a terrified public. Instead of retreating into the shadows, the perpetrator craved recognition and sought to amplify the agony of the grieving community. In October 1974, he placed a detailed letter inside a mechanical engineering textbook at the Wichita Public Library. This document contained information only the true culprit could possibly know, explicitly outlining his horrific actions at the Edgemoor Street House. He demanded attention from the press, mocking the police for their inability to track him down. 4 years later, he escalated his psychological warfare by sending a poem to a local television station claiming responsibility for another tragic loss. In these communications, he officially assigned himself a 3-letter moniker, an acronym describing his brutal methods of binding, tormenting, and ending his targets. This self-appointed title struck deep dread into the hearts of Kansas residents and transformed him into a notorious phantom. He forced families to watch news broadcasts detailing his arrogant letters, weaponizing the media to inflict secondary trauma. The authorities found themselves chasing shadows repeatedly thwarted by a man who seemed to vanish into the Midwestern wind. His communications stopped as abruptly as they started, initiating a decades-long silence that left the cold cases gathering dust in police archives. Following his final confirmed letter in 1979, the Phantom of Wichita went completely silent, leaving investigators stranded with thousands of useless tips and no physical suspect. The 1980s bled into the 1990s, and the specialized task force slowly disbanded as budget constraints forced detectives onto newer active cases. During these empty years, law enforcement cataloged immense volumes of paperwork, manually cross-referencing thousands of handwriting samples to no avail. Detectives conducted grueling door-to-door interviews across entire zip codes, meticulously logging alibis that ultimately led to frustrating dead ends. Some investigators retired, carrying the heavy burden of the unsolved tragedies into their civilian lives. Meanwhile, Rader simply blended back into his suburban routine, attending church meetings and raising his children just miles away from the police precinct. He watched the public panic fade into a distant, painful memory, privately relishing the secret knowledge of his past atrocities. The authorities possessed a partial biological profile from the earlier crime scenes, but the limited technology of the era prevented them from making a match. The legal system required a suspect to compare the sample against, but the perpetrator had vanished without leaving a single actionable trace. The victims' families endured decades of agonizing uncertainty, forced to navigate life knowing the man who destroyed their world walked entirely free. The stagnant timeline violently shifted in March 2004. Exactly 30 years after the nightmare first began, a local newspaper published a retrospective article detailing the unsolved tragedies, suggesting that the notorious perpetrator had likely passed away or ended up in prison for an unrelated crime. This public dismissal enraged Rader, shattering his fragile ego and compelling him to reclaim his terrifying spotlight. He immediately prepared a package containing authentic crime scene photographs and a photocopy of a victim's missing driver's license. He mailed this grim envelope to a Wichita television station, plunging the entire city back into a state of absolute dread. Detectives rushed to the newsroom, physically securing the envelope and confirming the dreadful reality that the monster was still alive. This unexpected communication reignited the dormant investigation, prompting the immediate formation of a new high-tech task force. Rader established a bizarre one-sided relationship with the media, dropping packages in local parks, library return boxes, and commercial dumpsters. He left detailed puzzles, word searches, and cryptic clues, demanding the city acknowledge his superior intellect. He forced the weary detectives into a high-stakes scavenger hunt, leaving authorities desperately chasing his breadcrumbs across the sprawling city limits. By the winter of 2004, the cat-and-mouse game reached unprecedented levels of psychological manipulation. Rotter left a package disguised as a popular cereal box near a rural highway sign, demanding the authorities communicate with him through classified newspaper advertisements. The police complied, placing obscure messages in the local paper under the guise of mundane personal ads. This strategy aimed to keep him talking, hoping his relentless need for attention would eventually force a catastrophic mistake. He dropped another package at a home improvement store containing a disturbing manifesto and jewelry taken from a victim decades prior. Investigators poured countless hours into analyzing the specific brand of manila envelopes he used, tracking the purchase history across multiple retail chains. They scrutinized the postal stamps, attempting to isolate the specific automated sorting machines that processed his mail. Despite utilizing advanced behavioral analysis and sweeping surveillance tactics, the police continually found themselves one step behind his calculated drops. He utilized public transportation routes and blind spots in security camera coverage to deposit his packages without ever showing his face. The investigation remained a frustrating maze of dead ends, as his meticulous planning continually shielded his true identity from the desperate task force. The breakthrough materialized from a profound display of technological ignorance and sheer arrogance. In early February 2005, Rader sent a typed letter to the police asking a specific fateful question. He wanted to know if a floppy disk could be traced back to a specific computer if he used it to send his next communication. He explicitly instructed the authorities to place an advertisement in the newspaper saying the disk was safe to use if they were telling the truth. The task force commanders recognized this as their absolute best opportunity to trap the elusive predator. Detectives immediately placed the requested advertisement in the Wichita Eagle, intentionally lying to a man who had terrorized their city for 3 decades. They guaranteed him that a floppy disk was entirely secure. Banking on his massive ego overriding his cautious nature, Rotter saw the advertisement, felt a false sense of security, and proceeded to prepare his next digital drop. On February 16, 2005, a local television station received a padded envelope containing a purple 1.44 megabyte floppy disk. Detectives confiscated the package within minutes, rushing it to their regional cybercrimes laboratory for immediate high-priority extraction. Inside the sterile, climate-controlled digital forensics lab, technicians inserted the purple disk into an isolated terminal. The disk contained a simple text document, but the investigator ignored the visible words and immediately dove into the hidden metadata. Using specialized recovery software, the technician pulled up the file's historical properties, revealing information the author believed was permanently deleted. The screen displayed 2 critical pieces of data proving the document was last saved by a user named Dennis at a computer registered to Christ Lutheran Church. Detectives cross-referenced the church leadership roster and instantly spotted the name Dennis Rader, the congregation president and park compliance officer. The physical description matched the vague profiles developed over the years, but authorities needed undeniable scientific proof before making an arrest. They discovered that his daughter attended a university medical clinic in a neighboring state, prompting a covert operation to secure her medical records. Detectives obtained a specialized court order, legally bypassing standard privacy protocols to acquire a tissue sample from her routine medical exam. The laboratory rushed the familial genetic comparison, working through the night to process the biological markers. On February 24, the forensic team confirmed a definitive, undeniable match between the daughter's sample and the biological evidence left at the tragic scenes. The morning of February 25, 2005, brought a bitter chill to the sprawling streets of Park City. A massive convoy of unmarked police cruisers and heavily armed tactical units quietly staged themselves along the perimeter of Ratter's daily route. Detectives watched through high-powered binoculars as he casually exited his modest home, climbed into his white municipal van, and headed toward his office. The tactical teams waited until he reached a heavily controlled intersection before swarming his vehicle from all four sides. Officers dragged the stunned compliance officer from the driver's seat, forcing him onto the cold asphalt as heavy metallic cuffs locked tightly around his wrists. The man who had terrorized an entire region for 3 decades offered zero physical resistance, appearing more bewildered than angry. An officer leaned down and asked if he knew why he was going to downtown headquarters. Rotter simply replied that he had his suspicions, officially ending the longest, most agonizing game of hide-and-seek in Kansas history. The community watched in utter disbelief as the news networks broadcasted the arrest of their friendly neighborhood Boy Scout leader. The terrifying realization that a monster had been living right next door, hiding perfectly in plain sight, shattered the town's remaining illusions of safety. Inside the concrete walls of the interrogation room, Rotter sat across from the lead detectives, maintaining a chillingly calm demeanor. He initially attempted to feign ignorance, asking vague questions about the nature of his sudden apprehension. The lead investigator calmly placed a printed photograph of the purple floppy disk on the metal table, sliding it directly in front of the suspect. Rotter stared at the image, his face flushing as the devastating reality of his technological blunder washed over him. He looked up at the officers and asked, with genuine disappointment, why they had lied to him in the newspaper advertisement. The detectives informed him that they were under no legal obligation to tell the truth to a man who stole innocent futures. Realizing he had entirely orchestrated his own downfall, his inflated ego deflated into a pathetic display of compliance. Over the next 30 hours, he waived his right to an attorney and meticulously detailed every single horrific act he committed. He spoke with the clinical, detached precision of a man reading a grocery list, severely disturbing the hardened investigators sitting across from him. The Phantom was finally unmasked, reduced to an aging, arrogant man who foolishly trusted a classified advertisement. The legal proceedings moved with unprecedented speed, entirely bypassing the agonizing spectacle of a prolonged public trial. In late June 2005, Rader stood before a packed courtroom and formally pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree offenses. During the hearing, the judge forced him to verbally recount the specific details of his crimes for the official record. Rader stood at the podium and described his horrific actions with terrifying enthusiasm, displaying absolutely zero remorse for the shattered families weeping in the gallery. He categorized his atrocities as mere projects, detailing his preparations with the cold, bureaucratic tone of a city compliance officer giving a mundane report. The sheer lack of human empathy emanating from the defendant left the presiding judge visibly disgusted. On August 18, 2005, the court handed down the maximum possible penalty under Kansas law at the time of the events. Rotter received 10 consecutive life sentences, ensuring a mandatory minimum of 175 years behind bars without the possibility of parole. The judge explicitly ordered that he serve his time in solitary confinement, stripping him of the audience and attention he so desperately craved. The heavy wooden doors of the El Dorado Correctional Facility slammed shut, permanently erasing him from the outside world. The families of the 10 victims finally received a measure of legal justice, though the profound scars inflicted upon their lives would never truly heal. They watched the man who stole their loved ones chained and led away, closing a terrifying 30-year chapter in Kansas history. Law enforcement agencies across the globe overhauled their protocols for analyzing digital media, forever changing the landscape of cyber forensics. The catastrophic failure of Rader's floppy disk served as a definitive warning to arrogant predators who believe they can outsmart modern technology. His case remains a chilling testament to the terrifying reality that absolute evil does not always lurk in dark alleyways. Sometimes the monster attends the local neighborhood watch meetings, enforces the city ordinances, and smiles at children passing by his manicured lawn. The facade of normalcy is often the most dangerous weapon a predator can wield against an unsuspecting public. But while Dennis Rader used the media to mock the police from afar, other predators take their deception directly to the cameras. Some perpetrators insert themselves directly into the center of the active search, standing shoulder to shoulder with the victim's grieving relatives. In August 2002, an English school caretaker decided to answer questions on national television, unaware that his own words were actively sealing his doom. The calendar read August of 2002. The quiet English town of Soham suffers under a massive missing persons investigation. Camera shutters click outside a local secondary school as reporters crowd around a young cooperative school caretaker. He stares into the lenses describing his final interaction with two missing 10-year-old girls. He tells the nation he was the last person to see them alive, offering minor details to help the desperate search. The man stands mere feet from the frantic parents, projecting the image of a concerned community member. He is not a helpful witness, but a predator hiding in plain sight, controlling the narrative while the community searches for ghosts. The market town of Soham, nestled in the flat agricultural landscape of Cambridgeshire, operates on quiet routines and profound trust. Narrow lanes weave past old stone churches and tight clusters of brick houses, creating a closed environment where neighbors know each other by name. In the summer of 2002, the town felt insulated from the dangers of the wider world. Children rode bicycles down the center of the road until the sodium streetlights flickered to life. Two 10-year-old girls, Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, embodied this innocent freedom. They were lifelong best friends, sharing secrets and spending endless afternoons walking the familiar paved footpaths of their neighborhood. They possessed bright, trusting demeanors, unaware of the shadows lurking in the corners of their safe community. Both girls looked forward to a late summer evening of celebration on August 4, 2002. Their families gathered for a casual weekend barbecue, filling the warm air with laughter and the smell of charcoal. The girls decided to go for a short evening walk to buy sweets from the local leisure center. Holly and Jessica bounded out the front door, wearing matching bright red Manchester United football shirts. The distinctive jerseys featured the name Beckham printed across the back in bold white lettering. They walked side by side down the concrete pavement, their voices echoing off the quiet brick walls of the residential streets. The sun began a slow descent, casting long, stretching shadows across the tarmac. The distance between the family home and the local sports center spanned a short, highly visible walk. Residents sat in their front gardens blind to the finality of the moment as the two young girls passed by. They carried no bags, no extra clothing, and held only a few coins to purchase candy. Their parents expected them back within 30 minutes, leaving the front door unlocked in anticipation of their quick return. The girls turned the corner onto the main thoroughfare, stepping away from the protective gaze of their parents. The clock ticked past 7 in the evening without the familiar sound of footsteps returning to the driveway. The parents exchanged worried glances as the evening air began to cool. The 30-minute errand stretched past an hour, prompting the families to step outside and scan the empty street. They walked the exact route the girls intended to take, expecting to find them distracted at a nearby playground. The local leisure center doors remained locked for the evening, and the surrounding pathways sat desolate. Panic replaced initial annoyance as darkness enveloped the small town. Frantic phone calls to neighbors and school friends yielded no new information. The parents contacted the local constabulary, initiating a response that shattered the quiet history of Cambridgeshire. Uniformed officers arrived with flashlights, sweeping the dark fields and narrow alleys surrounding the residential estate. Investigators rushed to retrace the physical steps of the girls, demanding access to local security cameras. They located a grainy, silent feed positioned over the Ross Piers Sports Center car park. The digital timestamp read exactly 6:13 in the evening on August 4, 2002. The black and white footage showed Holly and Jessica walking past the desolate expanse of asphalt. They looked relaxed, their matching shirts barely visible against the pixelated gray background of the concrete environment. This fleeting, soundless recording proved to be the final confirmed sighting of the two best friends. The local police escalated the situation, transitioning from a standard missing child protocol to a massive region-wide search operation. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras cut through the night sky, their heavy rotors echoing over the flat farmland. Hundreds of local volunteers poured into the streets by dawn, forming search lines that combed through tall grass and dense woodland. The investigation established a central command post at the local secondary school, transforming the quiet educational campus into a chaotic hub of law enforcement activity. The school caretaker, 28-year-old Ian Huntley, lived in a small cottage on the grounds, providing him immediate access to the police operation. He possessed keys to every building, walking free among the detectives and volunteers. Huntley approached the media, offering eager, detailed accounts of his supposed final interaction with the girls. He stood before national television cameras, adjusting his posture and speaking with calculated calmness to reporters. He claimed he saw Holly and Jessica walking past his cottage and paused to ask them how they were doing. The caretaker inserted himself into the epicenter of the tragedy, relishing the attention and the perceived power of holding vital information. His girlfriend, a local teaching assistant named Maxine Carr, stood firm by his side during these highly publicized interviews. Detectives sat down with Huntley and Carr to formally document their timeline for the evening of August 4th. The couple provided a unified, airtight narrative that deflected all suspicion away from the caretaker cottage. Carr told investigators she spent the entire day and evening with Huntley inside their home, cooking dinner and watching television. This fabricated shield forced the police to look elsewhere, wasting precious hours and resources on dead-end leads. Huntley used this borrowed time to embed himself deeper into the search efforts, offering to unlock school gates for the tracking dogs. He subjected the grieving parents to immense psychological cruelty by participating in press conferences while knowing the grim truth. He watched the mothers weep on live broadcasts, sitting in his living room mere yards away from the site of the tragedy. Huntley manipulated the narrative, steering search teams away from specific areas of the school grounds under the guise of helpful local knowledge. The predator wore the mask of a grieving community leader, hiding his dark reality behind a trusted occupational title. While Huntley paraded in front of the press, an unseen catastrophic failure in police intelligence allowed him to walk free. The investigation ran a routine background check on the caretaker, which returned clear on the national database. The system failed to show that police in a different jurisdiction had investigated Huntley in the past for multiple serious sexual offenses, because those past allegations never resulted in a formal conviction. Outdated data protection protocols mandated the immediate deletion of local intelligence files. The rigid, fragmented structure of regional police databases meant that Cambridgeshire authorities had zero access to the warnings gathered by neighboring forces. A disconnected digital network allowed a highly dangerous predator to secure employment at a secondary school without a single red flag being raised. This administrative loophole prioritized data purging over child protection, granting Huntley unrestricted, trusted access to vulnerable students. The systemic failure blinded the current detectives, preventing them from recognizing the extreme danger radiating from the helpful caretaker. The monster relied on the bureaucratic incompetence of the vetting system to maintain his perfect disguise. The investigation dragged into its second week, with search teams exhausting the immediate rural areas surrounding the town. Detectives decided to broadcast the television interviews of Maxine Carr on a constant loop, hoping her face might trigger a memory from a passing motorist. The strategy backfired on the couple in a spectacular fashion. Several sharp-eyed viewers contacted the police hotline, reporting that they recognized the teaching assistant, but not from Soham. Multiple witnesses placed Carr at a family gathering in Grimsby, over 100 miles away, on the exact evening of August 4th. The airtight alibi shattered, exposing a massive calculated lie at the center of the caretaker narrative. Investigators shifted their focus, pulling the original timeline apart, piece by piece. They realized Huntley spent the precise window of the disappearance alone on the school grounds. The man who organized press conferences and unlocked gates became the primary target of a covert surveillance operation. On August 16, 2002, 12 days after the girls vanished, the physical landscape of the investigation shifted. Dozens of forensic officers descended upon the secondary school campus, sealing off the perimeter with heavy steel fencing. They moved toward the residence of the caretaker and the adjacent school buildings, operating under strict media silence. The officers breached the school's storage facilities, searching through maintenance equipment, boiler rooms, and waste disposal units. The air grew tense as specially trained dogs swept the dark industrial corners of the campus. Inside a massive industrial-sized garbage bin, an officer made a grim, undeniable discovery. Deep beneath layers of discarded school waste, they found the remnants of matching red Manchester United football shirt. The fabric bore the devastating marks of an incomplete attempt to destroy the physical evidence. The discovery of the destroyed red shirts triggered an immediate, forceful tactical response. The facade of the cooperative caretaker collapsed the moment the heavy metallic click of handcuffs secured his wrists. Detectives dragged Huntley from the very school grounds he used to mask his dark compulsions. The physical geography of his deception became undeniable as investigators mapped the incredibly short distance between his front door and the hidden evidence. The chilling reality set in for the seasoned investigators walking the campus. Huntley lured the trusting children off the familiar concrete footpath and into the isolated walls of his residence. He utilized his position of authority to disarm their natural instincts, silencing their futures before the sun had even fully set on that Sunday evening. The predator never panicked during the subsequent search, opting instead to stand comfortable in the spotlight of the tragedy he created. The community of Soham fractured upon learning the identity of the man in custody. Parents realized they allowed their own children to walk the halls with a dangerous, predatory figure. The psychological torment inflicted upon the families reached an agonizing peak, knowing the person comforting the town orchestrated their permanent devastation. Huntley sat mere inches from a television screen, watching the desperate pleas of the mothers while the physical evidence sat in a bin just outside his window. His profound lack of empathy terrified the forensic psychologists assigned to the case. He never offered a genuine confession, forcing investigators to build a meticulous, irrefutable chain of forensic connections. The town recognized they were broken by a monster holding the keys to their own sanctuary. The trial commenced late in the year 2003, shifting the pain of the local community onto a national stage. Prosecutors laid out the devastating timeline, relying on microscopic fibers, cell phone tower data, and the collapsed false alibi to corner the caretaker. Huntley sat emotionless in the secure glass dock, listening as forensic experts dismantled his web of lies piece by piece. In December of 2003, a jury formally convicted Ian Huntley on 2 counts of the most severe charges possible. The presiding judge handed down a life sentence, ensuring the former caretaker would spend a minimum of 40 years behind heavy steel doors. Maxine Carr faced her own reckoning in the courtroom, convicted of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice for her fabricated alibi. She received a separate prison sentence, serving time for the calculated lies that gave a predator a critical 12-day head start. The immense tragedy forced the government to confront the catastrophic failures of their intelligence networks. The resulting public inquiry mandated a complete overhaul of how criminal records and background checks are shared among regional authorities. Strict new data retention laws ensured that intelligence regarding predatory behavior could never again be deleted just to save digital storage space. The quiet town of Soham rebuilt its shattered trust, forever marked by the loss of two bright, inseparable friends. The families continued their lives with an unimaginable void, holding on to the memories of a warm August evening before the darkness fell. The horrific betrayal by a trusted community figure remains a stark warning about the monsters hiding in plain sight. This type of predator is not consigned to the quiet brick lanes of England. Another terrifying figure was already utilizing his uniform to stalk victims in the dense, isolated wilderness of an American national park. July 22, 1999, the air inside the Cedar Lodge Motel office in El Portal, California smelled of cheap pine cleaner and stale coffee. Federal Bureau of Investigation agents sat across a laminate table from a quiet, neatly groomed handyman named Cary Stainer. He wore a crisp uniform shirt and answered their questions with polite, measured calm. Outside the window, missing person posters dyeing the faces of three vanished women flapped against the bulletin board in the hot canyon wind. Stainer had helped the family staple those very posters to the wooden posts just weeks earlier. The agents thanked him for his time, unaware that the monster they were hunting was sitting right in front of them, breathing their air. The Merced River Canyon carves a steep, jagged path through the western slope of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Highway 140 winds along the freezing, fast-moving water, flanked by sheer granite cliffs and dense stands of towering pines. In the winter months, the canyon floor remains cast in deep, freezing shadows for most of the afternoon. Just outside the Arch Rock entrance to Yosemite National Park sits the Cedar Lodge, a sprawling complex of rustic timber and stucco buildings. Sodium vapor streetlights cast an eerie orange glow over the asphalt parking lot when the sun drops below the canyon rim. The motel operates as a secluded base camp for tourists seeking the natural wonder of the valley. A heavy silence falls over the property at night, broken only by the deafening roar of the river 50 yards away. The nearest major town with a dedicated police force sits more than 40 miles down the winding mountain pass. Cell phone service in the steep canyon was non-existent in 1999. Visitors relied on bulky payphones, bolted to the exterior walls of the main office to contact the outside world. On February 14, 1999, 42-year-old Carol's son drove a bright red Pontiac Grand Prix rental car into the Cedar Lodge parking lot. She traveled with her 15-year-old daughter, Julie Sund, and Julie's 16-year-old friend, Silvina Peloso, an exchange student visiting from Argentina. They occupied room 509, a standard unit situated on the upper floor of a two-story block at the far end of the property. The room featured heavy floral curtains, 2 beds, and a single wooden door facing an open exterior walkway. Carol planned a simple, joyful holiday weekend centered around sightseeing in the famous glacier-carved valley. They spent the next day marveling at the frozen waterfalls and snapping photographs near the massive granite monoliths. They returned to the motel just as evening temperatures plummeted below freezing. The 3 women ate a quiet dinner at the motel restaurant before walking back to their unit under the orange glow of the security lights. They locked the heavy metal door, believing they were safe within the boundaries of a major tourist destination. The reality of their vulnerability remained hidden just a few doors down the concrete walkway. 37-year-old Carrie Stainer resided full-time in a small, weathered employee cabin located directly behind the main guest units of the Cedar Lodge. He worked as the resident motel handyman responsible for fixing leaky faucets, replacing broken locks, and maintaining the heating systems. Stainer possessed master keys that granted him unrestricted access to every single room on the massive property. Guests frequently saw his smiling face as he drove a maintenance cart or his personal blue International Scout along the asphalt paths. He presented himself as a helpful, mild-mannered local who happily offered directions to lost tourists. His quiet demeanor masked a fractured mind harboring violent, obsessive fantasies. Decades earlier, his younger brother Stephen had been the victim of a high-profile kidnapping, a tragedy that severely fractured the Stainer family dynamic. Carrie grew up in the shadows of media circuses and unaddressed psychological trauma, developing a severe detachment from human empathy. He watched the three women walk back to room 509 on that freezing February night. He knew the exact layout of their room, the structural weakness of the locks, and the total isolation of the canyon. The morning of February 16th arrived with a bitter frost covering the windshields in the Cedar Lodge parking lot. Carol, Julie, and Sylvina failed to return their room keys to the front desk by the mandatory checkout time. The cleaning staff entered room 509 to find the beds unmade and the women missing, though many of their personal belongings remained untouched. The bright red Pontiac Grand Prix was absent from its designated parking space directly below the exterior stairs. Carol missed a scheduled flight back to Eureka, California, prompting her husband to contact the Mariposa County Sheriff Department. Deputies arrived at the motel and conducted a cursory walkthrough of the room, initially treating the situation as a simple case of lost hikers. Days stretched into an agonizing week without a single trace of the women, the rental car, or any distress calls. The Federal Bureau of Investigation officially took jurisdiction, transforming the quiet mountain motel into a sprawling command center. Dozens of federal agents swarmed the property, setting up mobile units and stringing yellow tape across the parking lot. Law enforcement deployed helicopters with infrared cameras to scan the dense canopy of the Sierra National Forest. Search and rescue teams referred down vertical cliffs along Highway 140, looking for any sign of a vehicle that might have cairned off the narrow road. Carrie Stainer worked his daily maintenance shifts amidst this massive mobilization, quietly watching agents pore over maps spread across the hoods of their cruisers. The first major break materialized on March 18th, a full month after the women vanished from their room. A man walking his dog off a remote, unpaved logging road in Tuolumne County spotted a charred metal husk hidden deep in the brush. The location sat more than 50 miles north of the Cedar Lodge, concealed within a dense, isolated pine grove. Investigators identified the rusted, burned-out frame as the Pontiac Grand Prix rented by Carol Sund. The interior of the vehicle had been subjected to a massive thermal event, destroying the upholstery and melting the dashboard into a puddle of black plastic. Inside the trunk, authorities made a grim discovery that confirmed the women had met a brutal, permanent end. The nature of the scene indicated a highly organized, deliberate effort to erase all forensic evidence. Following the discovery of the burned vehicle, the Federal Bureau of Investigation developed severe tunnel vision regarding a specific group of local criminals. Informants from the Central Valley drug underworld contacted investigators claiming that a violent methamphetamine ring based in Modesto orchestrated the attack. Federal agents directed almost all of their resources toward a handful of career criminals with histories of extreme antisocial behavior. Agents executed multiple high-risk search warrants on dilapidated trailers hidden deep in the Sierra foothills. They detained a group of men, hauling them into windowless interrogation rooms for aggressive, hours-long questioning sessions. The task force commanders publicly hinted that they had the right men in custody and promised an imminent resolution. This singular focus on the drug ring caused investigators to ignore the employees residing at the exact location where the women vanished. The agents failed to recognize that the informants were simply feeding them fabricated stories in exchange for reduced sentences on unrelated narcotics charges. During the second week of April 1999, the task force continued chasing the fabricated narcotics leads across 3 different counties. Agents analyzed soil samples from the boots of the Modesto suspects, hoping to match the dirt to the remote logging road. A local resident discovered another tragic scene in a brush-covered ravine near Lake Don Pedro, miles away from the burned vehicle. Investigators identified the site as connected to the youngest victim, confirming that the attacker possessed an intimate knowledge of obscure back roads. At the Cedar Lodge, Cary Stainer carried on with his daily maintenance routine, sweeping the walkways right outside the federal command post. Federal agents actually interviewed Stainer during a routine canvass of the motel staff, but they dismissed him after a 5-minute conversation. He possessed no serious criminal record, and his calm, helpful demeanor masked his internal pathology. The systemic failure stemmed from a rigid profiling protocol that assumed an attack of this magnitude required multiple perpetrators. Because Stainer operated completely alone, he slipped through the massive cracks of a federal dragnet designed to catch an organized gang. Throughout the month of May and into June of 1999, the Cedar Lodge remained open for business despite the ongoing investigation. The Sun and Peloso families traveled to the motel to post reward flyers and plead for information regarding the horrifying events. Cary Stainer physically approached the grieving relatives in the parking lot, offering his condolences and handing them stacks of missing person posters. He stood inches away from the people whose lives he had just destroyed, staring directly into their tear-filled eyes with an expression of manufactured sympathy. He helped them staple the heavy paper flyers to the wooden bulletin boards outside the motel restaurant. The psychological dread of this interaction remained unknown to the families at the time. Law enforcement continued to leak statements to the media, insisting they were closing in on the Central Valley Drug Associates. The heavy reliance on jailhouse informants created a catastrophic delay in forensic processing at the actual point of abduction. The room where the incident began was cleaned and rented to dozens of new tourists, permanently destroying crucial microscopic evidence. By mid-July 1999, the daily temperatures in the Yosemite Valley routinely exceeded 100 degrees, baking the granite cliffs. The investigation into the Modesto suspects unraveled when their alibis were verified by time-stamped security footage from a distant convenience store. The federal task force found themselves exactly where they started in February, holding thousands of pages of useless informant testimony. Cary Stainer recognized that the massive law enforcement presence was leaving the canyon, pulling their mobile command units out of the lodge parking lot. He began to cruise the winding mountain roads after his shift ended, scanning the isolated trailheads for targets. The dense forest surrounding the Yosemite entrance stations offered zero visibility from the main highway, creating miles of blind spots. Tourists continued to flock to the national park, unaware that the predator responsible for the winter tragedy remained free. The absolute failure of the task force to secure the original perimeter allowed Stainer to escalate his violent impulses without any surveillance. On July 21, 1999, 26-year-old Joy Armstrong finished her shift as a nature instructor for the Yosemite Institute. She resided in an isolated wood frame cabin in Foresta, a tiny residential enclave located deep within the boundaries of the national park. The community consisted of just a few scattered houses separated by dense thickets of pine trees and narrow dirt driveways. Armstrong drove her small pickup truck up the steep, unpaved road and parked near the front steps of her home. Cary Stainer drove his distinct blue International Scout down that very same dirt road, specifically seeking an isolated property. He parked out of sight, walked through the dry summer brush, and approached the young naturalist as she gathered her belongings. The geographic isolation of the Foresta cabin meant no neighbors could hear the desperate struggle that immediately ensued in the driveway. Armstrong fought back with immense ferocity, forcing the attacker to leave behind a chaotic scene of scattered personal items and disturbed earth. Her friends reported her missing the very next morning when she failed to arrive for a scheduled trip to the high country. Federal agents rushed to the Foresta cabin on July 22nd. The physical reality of the violent struggle was undeniable. Deep scuff marks tore through the dry dirt of the driveway while personal items lay scattered across the pine needles. Search teams immediately fanned out into the surrounding woods. They found her hidden near a drainage ditch a short distance from the property, confirming she had met a brutal end. The federal agents secured a massive perimeter around the isolated community and set up roadblocks at every exit point. Park rangers interviewed a resident who distinctly remembered a blue International Scout parked near the cabin the previous afternoon. That specific vehicle belonged to the handyman at the Cedar Lodge. The task force finally turned their absolute attention to Cary Stainer. Investigators raced to the motel complex on Highway 140. Stainer had abandoned his shift and fled the canyon. Agents tracked his vehicle registration and financial records in real time. They located his specific Blue Scout parked at Laguna del Sol, a secluded resort in Sacramento County. Heavily armed federal agents descended on the property, locating Stainer eating lunch in the communal dining hall. They placed him in handcuffs without a single struggle. Inside the interrogation room, his polite facade crumbled. Stainer waived his rights and detailed the exact methods he used to bypass the lock on room 509. He confessed to targeting Carol, Julie, and Sylvina. Destroying the false drug ring theory, the monster hiding in plain sight finally revealed his true face. The sheer magnitude of the tragedy triggered dual prosecutions in both federal and state jurisdictions. Cary Stainer faced federal charges first for the attack on Joey Armstrong, as her life was taken on federal land within the boundaries of Yosemite National Park. His defense attorneys attempted to negotiate a plea agreement to avoid the ultimate punishment. Stainer pleaded guilty to the federal charges in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. He stood before a federal judge and listened as the court condemned him to die behind bars. The Armstrong family delivered devastating victim impact statements, highlighting the incredible future that was stolen from the young naturalist. However, the federal conviction only addressed one facet of his horrifying crime spree. State prosecutors in Mariposa County immediately initiated proceedings for the events that occurred at the Cedar Lodge Motel. In 2002, the state of California brought Stainer to trial for the tragic fates of Carol Sund, Julie Sund, and Sylvina Peloso. The trial venue was moved to Santa Clara County to ensure an impartial jury, given the intense media saturation in the Sierra foothills. During the penalty phase, defense attorneys presented extensive records of the profound psychological trauma Stainer endured during his deeply troubled childhood. The jury wholly rejected the defense's attempt to use his brother's famous kidnapping as an excuse for his unimaginable violence. They returned a unanimous verdict of death, prompting the judge to officially sentence Cary Stainer to be executed by the state of California. He was transferred to the maximum security block at San Quentin State Prison, where he remains on death row today. The Cedar Lodge eventually demolished the specific unit where the nightmare began, attempting to erase the physical reminder of the tragedy. This horrifying reality of a predator hiding behind a mundane existence is a nightmare that extends far beyond the isolated mountains of Yosemite. In May 2013, the residents of a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, would discover that they're friendly. Unassuming neighbor Ariel Castro was harboring a decade-long house of horrors right behind his locked front door. On May 6, 2013, the heavy silence of Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, shattered. A frantic woman pressed her face against the narrow opening of a locked aluminum storm door, screaming for someone to help her. Charles Ramsey, a neighbor eating his meal across the street, heard the desperate cries and walked over to investigate the commotion. He assumed it was a domestic dispute, just another loud argument on a block accustomed to noise. The woman thrust her arm through a small gap, begging him to break the door down. She declared her name was Amanda Berry, a name that had haunted the city of Cleveland for a decade. Ramsey kicked the bottom panel of the door out, allowing Amanda to crawl through the jagged opening, clutching a small child to her chest, and flee into the fading evening light. The neighborhood of Tremont sits just south of downtown Cleveland, characterized by tightly packed, aging two-story houses clad in faded aluminum siding. Porches sit only a few feet apart, allowing neighbors to hear conversations drifting through open screens on warm summer nights. The close proximity of these homes created a false sense of collective security for the families living along Lorraine Avenue and Seymour Avenue. In August of 21-year-old Michelle Knight navigated these very streets. Michelle faced a difficult life fighting to regain custody of her young son while relying on the charity of relatives. She stood a mere 4 feet 7 inches tall, moving through the city with a quiet determination to rebuild her fractured family. Her daily routine involved walking along Lorraine Avenue, a busy thoroughfare lined with corner stores, bus stops, and worn brick storefronts. She believed she was safe walking in broad daylight among the familiar faces of her neighborhood. The community viewed Tremont as a tough but tight-knit enclave where everyone minded their own business. 8 months later, in April of 2003, 16-year-old Amanda Berry finished her shift at a local Burger King on West 110th Street and Lorraine Avenue. Amanda was a vibrant teenager, saving money to buy new clothes and dreaming of her upcoming 17th birthday. She called her sister to state she had secured a ride home, her voice carrying the light-hearted exhaustion of a long day at work. Just 1 year after Amanda vanished, 14-year-old Gina DeJesus walked home from her middle school on the west side of the city. Gina possessed a bright, trusting personality, bound tight to her large family and known for her infectious laugh. Her route home took her along the same familiar blocks, past the same small grocers and chain-link fences lining Lorraine Avenue. These 3 young women shared no connection other than the geographic center of their daily movements. Their families waited by windows, dialed police, and plastered the telephone poles of Cleveland with thousands of missing posters. The neighborhood buzzed with fear, yet the true threat lived hidden in a decaying White House at 2207 Seymour Avenue. The trap snapped shut on August 23, 2002, when Ariel Castro spotted Michelle Knight walking toward a family appointment. Castro, a former school bus driver and local musician, offered her a ride in his vehicle. He used a disarming, polite demeanor, promising to show her some puppies at his house before dropping her off. Michelle accepted the brief detour, stepping through the heavy wooden front door of the Seymour Avenue residence. Once inside, Castro locked the deadbolt, transforming the quiet domestic space into a concrete prison. He led her upstairs, restrained her limbs, and initiated a decade of unspeakable physical and psychological torment. On April 21, 2003, Castro deployed the exact same predatory tactic on Amanda Berry. He recognized the teenager from the neighborhood, pulled his car alongside her on Lorraine Avenue, and offered a quick ride home. Amanda trusted the familiar face of a neighborhood father and stepped into the passenger seat. The geography of the Seymour Avenue house served as the ultimate cloaking device for the crimes. The property featured a deep, narrow driveway, blocked by tall wooden gates that shielded the backyard and side entrances from street view. On April 2, 2004, Castro spotted 14-year-old Gina DeGise walking home from school. He knew Gina well, as his own daughter was close friends with the young girl. Castro approached her on the street, claiming he would drive her to his daughter's house to hang out. Gina climbed into the car, unaware that her best friend father had locked 2 other women in his upstairs bedrooms. Castro drove her to Seymour Avenue, ushered her through the side door, and forced her into the darkest corners of his home. The heavy curtains remained drawn tight across the front windows, blocking any light or movement from reaching the sidewalk. The front porch sat just 15 feet from the public sidewalk, a bustling path where postal workers and children passed every single day. The Cleveland Police Department initiated their response to the disappearances with a series of critical missteps. Investigators classified Michelle Knight as an adult runaway, citing her age and her ongoing custody disputes as reasons for her absence. They entered her name into the national database but allocated 0 active patrol resources to track her physical movements. When Amanda Berry vanished, detectives leaned on the assumption that the teenager had fled her home by choice, a common procedural default that delayed urgent search grids. The passage of the first 48 hours ticked by with no canvassing of the Seymour Avenue block. Officer did not pull surveillance footage from the local businesses along Lorraine Avenue until the trail had frozen cold. The families felt abandoned by the system, forced to organize their own search parties and print their own flyers. The disappearance of Gina DeGise forced law enforcement to acknowledge a pattern given her young age and the loud outcry from her parents. However, the geographic focus of the police search remained miles away from Tremont, leaving Seymour Avenue unchecked. Inside the house, Castro established an environment of absolute psychological destruction. He forced the 3 women to watch the local evening news broadcasts, detailing their own missing person investigations. The victims sat chained to heavy furniture, watching their mothers weep on television, unable to reach through the glass. Castro amplified this torment by attending the public vigils held for the missing girls in the neighborhood. He stood in the candlelight alongside the grieving community, holding a flyer bearing the face of Gina DeGise. He walked up to the mother of Gina, offering her comforting words and a warm embrace while hiding the darkest secret imaginable. He played his bass guitar at local gatherings, maintaining the perfect facade of an ordinary sympathetic community member. He returned to Seymour Avenue after these events, locking the heavy doors and taunting the women with details of his interactions with their loved ones. The cognitive dissonance of his public empathy and private cruelty broke the hope of the women piece by piece. The structural deficiencies of the local administration exacerbated the tragedy as the calendar transitioned through 2004 as well as 2005. Neighbors living adjacent to Castro began noticing unsettling anomalies at the 2207 property. One resident heard loud, rhythmic banging against the exterior walls and called the Cleveland Dispatch Center to report a potential domestic disturbance. Patrol cars arrived on the street. Officers walked up the driveway, knocked on the front door, and received no answer. Standard operating procedure dictated that without imminent, visible danger or a warrant, officers could not force entry into the home. They turned around, walked back to their cruisers, and cleared the call from their radio logs. Another neighbor reported seeing a naked woman crawling on her hands and knees in the backyard, guided by a man holding a dog leash. Officers responded to the area, conducted a brief perimeter check, found nothing out of the ordinary, and departed the scene. The rigid adherence to basic protocol, combined with a lack of investigative curiosity, allowed Castro to operate his personal dungeon without interference. As 2006 arrived, the physical reality of the captive women grew grim. They spent their days confined to small, sweltering upstairs bedrooms, their movements restricted by heavy chains and padlocks. Castro boarded up the windows from the inside, sealing off all natural light and fresh air from the second floor. The deafening hum of window air conditioning units and loud radios masked the sounds of their suffering from the adjacent homes. During this grueling period, Amanda Berry became pregnant by her captor, introducing a new layer of complexity and danger to their existence. Castro refused to seek any external medical care, forcing the women to manage the dangerous situation on their own. On Christmas Day of 2006, Amanda went into labor inside a small plastic inflatable pool set up in the bedroom. Michelle Knight, facing constant threats from Castro, acted as the sole medical attendant during the agonizing delivery. A baby girl took her first breath inside the locked room, joining the terrifying reality of Seymour Avenue. The empty spaces separating 2007 from 2012 dragged on with a suffocating, agonizing slowness. The search efforts outside had gone cold, with detectives moving on to newer, fresher case files piling up on their desks. The faded, missing posters of Amanda and Gina peeled off the telephone poles, washed away by years of harsh Ohio winters. Inside, the child grew up within the confines of the house, her entire world limited to the wooden walls and locked doors of the second floor. Castro took the young girl out to visit his family on rare occasions, presenting her as the child of a girlfriend to avoid probing questions. Child Protective Services and school district truancy, officers never flagged the existence of this undocumented child wandering the neighborhood. The local authorities remained blind to the massive, ongoing crime occurring just a few miles from police headquarters. The women survived by forming an unbreakable bond, whispering to each other through the thin drywall separating their rooms. They mapped the precise schedule of their captor, learning the exact sounds of his vehicle pulling into the driveway and the metallic click of his keys. On the afternoon of May 6, 2013, the rigid security protocols of Seymour Avenue cracked. Castro left the house to run a series of errands, making a fatal, uncharacteristic error. He forgot to lock the heavy interior door leading to the upstairs hallway. Amanda Berry heard the front door shut and listened closely as the engine of his vehicle faded down the street. Absolute silence filled the house, signaling her one desperate chance at freedom. Amanda seized the moment, rushing down the wooden staircase with her 6-year-old daughter. She reached the front entrance, finding the main wooden door open, but a heavy aluminum storm door blocked her path. The screen door remained secured from the outside, dropping her just inches from the fresh air. Amanda began screaming for her life, banging her fists against the glass to draw attention. Charles Ramsey and another neighbor, Angel Cordero, heard the frantic noise echoing across the street. They sprinted up the concrete steps of the porch, realizing the severe danger of the situation. Ramsey kicked the lower panel of the door, snapping the aluminum frame in half. Amanda squeezed through the jagged metal opening, sprinting to a neighboring house to dial 911. Dispatchers heard the panicked voice of a ghost, sending multiple police units to the location. Cleveland police officers rushed to the scene within minutes, storming the Seymour Avenue property with weapons drawn. Officers breached the dark, cramped hallways and climbed the narrow, creaking staircase. They found Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus cowering in the darkness, terrified of the loud commotion. The officers announced their presence, prompting the women to weep in pure disbelief as their decade of invisible torment ended. The realization of the crime sent shockwaves through the ranks of the Cleveland Police Department. Detectives secured the perimeter, stringing yellow tape across the very driveway neighbors had walked past for 10 years. The forensic teams entered the property, documenting the heavy chains, padlocks, and boarded windows hiding in plain sight. Investigators marveled at the sheer audacity of a predator operating right next to a bustling public sidewalk without detection. A massive dragnet enveloped the city to locate Ariel Castro before he could flee the jurisdiction. Later that same evening, officers spotted Castro pulling into a fast food parking lot not far from the Tremont neighborhood. Patrol cars swarmed his vehicle, boxing him in from all sides to prevent any chance of a high-speed pursuit. Officers dragged him from the seat, forcing him to the pavement and placing him in heavy steel handcuffs. The monster who had smiled at the mothers of his victims was in custody. The legal system moved with unprecedented speed to dismantle the life of Ariel Castro, aiming to spare the women the trauma of a prolonged trial. In July of 2013, Castro faced a staggering 977-count indictment, encompassing hundreds of charges of kidnapping and horrific physical abuse. Facing the absolute certainty of a death penalty conviction, he accepted a massive plea deal offered by the Cuyahoga County prosecutors. The judge sentenced Castro to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 1,000 consecutive years. The sentencing hearing provided a platform for the survivors to face their captor, with Michelle Knight delivering a powerful statement of resilience to the man who stole her youth. The city of Cleveland demolished the house at 2207 Seymour Avenue, erasing the physical structure of horror from the Tremont neighborhood. The empty lot transformed into a small community garden, serving as a quiet tribute to the immense strength of the three survivors. The women began the grueling process of reclaiming their independence, integrating back into a world that had moved on without them. Ariel Castro arrived at the Correctional Reception Center in Orient, Ohio, to begin serving his endless sentence. The Department of Rehabilitation and Correction placed him in isolated protective custody, aware of the high-profile nature of his crimes. He spent his days confined to a small concrete cell, stripped of the control and dominance he had wielded for 10 years. On September 3, 2013, just 1 month into his sentence, guards conducting routine rounds made a grim discovery. Ariel Castro had ended his own life within the walls of his cell, escaping the decades of harsh confinement awaiting him. The abrupt conclusion of his life offered no further answers to the families, but it cemented the final safety of his victims. The monstrous facade of a concerned community member crumbling under scrutiny is a recurring nightmare for true crime investigators. In October of 1994, another parent stood in front of television cameras in South Carolina, sobbing with fierce intensity for her missing children, while hiding a much darker truth. It is late October in the year 1994, and the humid air of Union, South Carolina is thick with panic and disbelief. Before the harsh glare of national television cameras sits 23-year-old Susan Smith, clutching the hand of her estranged husband while tears spill across her cheeks. She looks directly into the lens and begs for the safe return of her 3-year-old son Michael and her 14-month-old son Alex. According to her frantic account to law enforcement, a carjacker forced her from her vehicle at a quiet intersection and vanished into the darkness with her helpless children strapped inside. Millions of viewers across the nation watch the grieving mother and feel a profound collective heartbeat of sympathy. Yet inside the interrogation rooms of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, seasoned investigators are staring at the exact same broadcast with icy skepticism. Behind her trembling voice and rehearsed pleas, the detectives see subtle fractures in a story that is about to tear a small town apart. Union, South Carolina. In the early 1990s is a quiet textile community anchored by rolling hills, brick mills, and dense pine forests that stretch for miles along the broad river. The town operates on a familiar rhythm where neighbors recognize every passing vehicle and families gather on church steps every Sunday morning. 23-year-old Susan Smith grew up inside this tight-knit environment, navigating the routine expectations of small-town southern life. She worked as a secretary at the local Conso Products plant, where her bright demeanor made her a recognizable fixture among the administrative staff. To the casual observer walking down Main Street, Susan appeared to be a devoted young homemaker building a stable foundation for her family. Her life revolved entirely around the demanding schedules of her two young boys, who were the center of attention in her neighborhood. However, beneath the polished exterior of suburban domesticity, her household was steadily collapsing under the weight of severe financial strain and personal instability. 3-year-old Michael was an energetic toddler known for his cheerful smile and attachment to his younger brother, while 14-month-old Alex was just beginning to take his first unsteady steps across the living room rug. Susan had married David Smith, a local grocery store assistant manager, when she was just 19 years old, but their union quickly soured due to repeated infidelity and mounting debt. By the autumn of 1994, the couple had separated, leaving Susan alone in a quiet brick house while she attempted to balance motherhood with full-time employment. The physical layout of her world contracted to the few miles separating the Conso plant from the daycare center and her empty home. During this period of intense loneliness, she initiated a secret romantic relationship with Tom Findlay, the wealthy son of the Conso products owner. This relationship quickly became Susan's primary obsession and her perceived escape route from the struggles of a single-income household. She viewed the wealthy heir as a path to social status and freedom, blinding her to the reality of her obligations as a mother. In mid-October of 1994, just days before the tragedy unfolded, Tom Findlay delivered a formal letter to Susan that completely shattered her ambitions. The document explicitly stated that while he cared for her, he was unwilling to continue the relationship because he did not want the responsibility of raising another man's children. For Susan, the written rejection acted as a devastating psychological blow that severed her connection to the life she desperately wanted to attain. She read and read the letter inside her quiet home, viewing Michael and Alex not as her beloved sons, but as permanent obstacles standing between her and her romantic desires. Her state of mind shifted into a cold, calculating resentment toward the two toddlers, whose mere existence had cost her the wealthy partner she coveted. The community around her continued its peaceful autumn routines, completely unaware that a dark domestic crisis was approaching its breaking point inside the Smith residence. The tension built silently within the walls of her home until the final Tuesday of the month arrived. On the evening of October 25, 1994, the dusk settled early over the quiet crossroads near the Monarch Mills area on the outskirts of Union. Just after 9 o'clock, a frantic motorist pulled up to a nearby home and pounded on the front door, begging the residents to call emergency services immediately. When local sheriff's deputies arrived at the intersection of Highway 49 and Monarch Highway, they found Susan Smith standing on the shoulder of the road in a state of apparent hysteria. She told the arriving officers that she had stopped her burgundy 1990 Mazda Protege at the red traffic light when a violent assailant suddenly opened her driver's side door. According to her detailed statement, a black man wearing a knit cap shoved a weapon into her ribs, ordered her out of the car, and sped away down the dark rural highway. She claimed she ran behind the vehicle screaming for him to stop because her 3-year-old and 14-month-old sons were still strapped into their child safety seats in the back. Within minutes, radio dispatchers broadcast an urgent all-points bulletin across South Carolina, initiating a desperate manhunt for the stolen Mazda and the two missing boys. By midnight, dozens of state troopers, local police officers, and citizen volunteers had established roadblocks across every major thoroughfare leaving Union County. Search teams scanned the darkened ditches, rest areas, and abandoned barns along the highway corridors, terrified of what the elements might do to two helpless toddlers left alone in the cold. By the following morning, the investigation transformed from a localized police operation into a massive, nationwide media event that drew satellite news trucks to the small courthouse square. Susan and her estranged husband David sat side by side on national broadcasts, pleading directly into the cameras for the kidnapper to show mercy and return the children unharmed. The entire country watched the weeping mother press a tissue to her eyes, and thousands of sympathetic letters, donations, and tips flooded the Union County Sheriff's Office. Yet while the public wept for the young family, investigators on the ground were already beginning to encounter alarming discrepancies between the physical evidence and the story Susan told on television. The point of no return had passed, and law enforcement was about to peel back the layers of a meticulously constructed deception. During the first 4 days of the investigation, the Union County Sheriff's Office, partnered with agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, pursued every lead with relentless urgency. Detectives pulled criminal records for hundreds of individuals matching Susan's description of the carjacker, pulling innocent residents from their homes for questioning during the early morning hours. This investigative direction ignited severe racial tension across the region, as local law enforcement poured significant resources into hunting a suspect based entirely on a fabricated description. The procedural mandate to treat the reporting victim with absolute empathy created a dangerous loophole that allowed Susan to manipulate the direction of the state's highest police powers. While federal agents scoured interstate rest stops all the way to the North Carolina border, valuable forensic time was lost searching for a phantom vehicle on the open highway. Experienced search coordinators noted that typical carjackers abandon stolen vehicles quickly when they discover infants inside. Yet 9 days of aerial surveys by helicopters produced zero trace of the burgundy Mazda. The absolute lack of skid marks, broken glass, or personal items discarded along Highway 49 left the lead investigators with a disturbing void of physical corroboration. On the 5th day of the search, Sheriff Howard Wells and federal investigators shifted their focus from the regional highways back to the exact physical layout of the Monarch intersection. Sheriff Wells personally drove to the intersection of Highway 49 and Monarch Highway during the late evening hours to reconstruct the timeline of the alleged carjacking. He discovered a crucial engineering feature about the traffic light system that Susan had failed to account for during her initial police interviews. The traffic signal at that specific crossroads did not operate on a fixed timer during the night hours. It remained permanently green for Highway 49 unless a vehicle pulled onto the cross street to trigger the magnetic sensor beneath the asphalt. Detectives checked with residents living near the corner and confirmed that no cross traffic had passed through the intersection during the exact minutes. Susan claimed she was forced to stop at a red light. This technical reality meant that the burgundy Mazda would never have encountered a red signal at that location, proving that the inciting event of her narrative was physically impossible. The realization hit the investigative team with crushing weight, transforming the grieving mother from a sympathetic victim into the primary focus of a homicide inquiry. Armed with the traffic light discrepancy, agents from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division requested that Susan submit to formal polygraph examinations at their state headquarters. During these extensive testing sessions, certified examiners focused their questions precisely on her knowledge of the exact location where Michael and Alex were hidden. The diagnostic charts recorded massive physiological spikes, indicating severe deception whenever she was asked if she knew who had taken her children or where the vehicle was located. Outside the examination room, behavioral profilers observed that Susan's demeanor shifted rapidly from hysterical weeping during televised interviews to calm, calculated detachment the moment the broadcast lights were turned off. When detectives attempted to comfort her during breaks in the questioning, she frequently asked concerning procedural questions about what penalties a person might face if an accident had occurred. Investigators also executed a search warrant at her brick home where they uncovered the original breakup letter written by Tom Findlay hidden inside her bedroom desk. The discovery of the letter provided the precise psychological motive that connected the disappearance of the children directly to her desire for a child-free lifestyle. Despite the mounting forensic suspicion behind closed doors, Susan continued to grant emotional interviews to national television journalists who visited Union County. She sat on her mother's sofa with cameras rolling, looking directly at the viewers and declaring that her children were out there somewhere waiting for their mother to bring them home. This strategic use of the media forced local law enforcement into a delicate psychological chess match, as any public accusation without definitive proof would cause massive community outrage. Sheriff Howard Wells recognized that confronting her too aggressively might cause her to shut down legally and request a defense attorney before the location of the children could be confirmed. He instructed his team to maintain a supportive posture in front of the press while systematically closing every alternative alibi she attempted to offer during private interrogations. Day after day, detectives methodically disproved every potential sighting reported by citizens across the country, narrowing the geographical focus back to the immediate waterways surrounding the town. The search teams redirected their boats and sonar equipment toward the murky depths of local reservoirs, waiting for the inevitable crack in the mother's rehearsed facade. By the morning of November 3, 1994, exactly 9 days after the initial emergency call, the investigative team prepared for a final decisive confrontation inside the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wells brought Susan into a quiet conference room away from the glare of the press and the influence of her supportive family members. He laid out the complete timeline of her actions on October 25th, placing the physical impossibility of the red light directly on the table alongside her failed deception examinations. He spoke with a quiet, authoritative tone, dismantling her phantom carjacker narrative piece by piece without raising his voice or offering any false hope. Susan sat in the hard wooden chair, staring down at her trembling hands as the protective layers of her elaborate lie disintegrated under the weight of verified facts. The room remained completely silent for several minutes while the sheriff waited patiently for her psychological endurance to collapse completely. When she finally looked up, the weeping mother who had deceived an entire nation vanished, replaced by a cold reality that chilled the experienced law enforcement officers to their core. In the quiet isolation of the interrogation room on that Thursday afternoon, Susan finally bowed her head and whispered the exact location where her children could be found. She confessed to investigators that there was no carjacker at the Monarch intersection and that she had driven alone with Michael and Alex down the isolated rural roads leading toward John D. Long Lake to understand the horror of her final destination. One must examine the specific physical geography of John D. Long Lake, located approximately 9 miles northwest of Union. The body of water is an artificial reservoir surrounded by dense timber and accessible by a single narrow, paved access road that terminates at a concrete boat launch. The terrain drops at a sharp downward slope directly from the asphalt ramp into the dark, murky waters that reach depths of more than 20 feet near the center. Under the cover of total darkness on the night of October 25th, Susan drove her burgundy Mazda Perche down this isolated stretch of road, stopping mere feet from the water's edge. She stepped out of the driver's seat, left the engine running with the transmission in neutral, and walked to the rear of the vehicle where her 2 toddlers were securely restrained in their safety seats, standing on the damp concrete of the boat ramp. Susan reached inside the vehicle, released the parking brake, and stepped away from the driver's side door. She watched as the 1990 Mazda Protege began to roll down the incline, gathering momentum as its tires left the pavement and entered the cold waters of the lake. According to her own formal statement to law enforcement, the vehicle did not submerge immediately upon impact with the reservoir's surface. Instead, it floated outward for several agonizing minutes while drifting toward the deeper center of the lake. She stood on the dark shore and listened to the sounds of the car taking on water, making zero physical attempt to re-enter the lake or unbuckle her trapped children. The 3-year-old and the 14-month-old remained firmly secured in their child safety harnesses, entirely dependent on the protection of the parent who stood watching from the dry bank. As the front end of the vehicle dipped beneath the surface, the dark waters of John D. Long Lake closed over the roof of the burgundy sedan, extinguishing the lives of 2 innocent boys. Once the ripples on the surface cleared, Susan walked back down the dark rural road alone to compose her fabricated carjacking narrative for the emergency responders. Within 1 hour of her signed confession, dive teams and heavy recovery cranes converged on the quiet shores of John D. Long Lake beneath the glare of portable emergency floodlights. Navy divers plunged into the freezing zero-visibility depths of the reservoir, following the slope of the lake bed until their hands struck the metallic roof of the burgundy Mazda. The underwater technicians attached heavy steel tow cables to the frame of the submerged vehicle, signaling the winch operators on the bank to begin the grim process of pulling the car back to dry land. As the rusted metal broke the surface of the dark water, the surrounding crowd of law enforcement officers, search, volunteers, and local officials fell into an absolute deathly silence. Sheriff Wells approached the dripping sedan and confirmed through the shattered windows that little Michael and Alex were still strapped tightly inside their protective safety seats in the rear passenger area. The physical evidence verified every horrific detail of the confession, bringing a definitive and devastating end to the 9-day national search that had captivated millions of viewers. The monster who had spent over a week crying on television and demanding justice from the public stood exposed as the sole architect of her children's permanent fate. In July of 1995, the Union County Courthouse became the epicenter of a massive legal proceeding that drew global media attention to the small South Carolina town. Susan Smith stood trial for 2 counts of taking the lives of her 2 young sons, facing a prosecution team that sought the ultimate punishment of the death penalty for her calculated actions. During the dramatic 3-week trial, prosecutors presented the physical evidence from the boat ramp, the psychological evaluations, and the devastating breakup letter from Tom Findlay to establish her motive beyond any reasonable doubt. The defense team attempted to portray Susan as a severely depressed individual who had originally intended to end her own life in the lake before jumping from the moving vehicle in a state of sudden panic. However, the jury rejected this explanation after deliberating for less than 3 hours, delivering a definitive guilty verdict on both counts of first-degree homicide on July 25, 1995, 3 days later. After listening to tearful testimony from the boy's grieving father, the same jury voted against capital punishment and sentenced the 24-year-old mother to life imprisonment, under the specific legal statutes of South Carolina at the time of her conviction. The sentence mandated that she serve a minimum of 30 calendar years behind bars before becoming eligible for parole consideration. For the past 3 decades, Susan Smith has lived out her sentence inside the Leith Correctional Institution, a high-security state women's prison located in Greenwood, South Carolina. During her extensive incarceration, prison records indicate she committed numerous disciplinary infractions, including unauthorized communications with external media contacts and inappropriate interactions with correctional personnel. On November 20th, 2024, exactly 30 years after her initial arrest, she appeared before the South Carolina Board of Parolles and Pardons via remote video link to request her freedom. The 7-member parole board listened to intense opposition statements from her former husband David Smith and lead investigator Howard Wells before voting unanimously to deny her application within just minutes. She remains locked inside her cell today, forever remembered as the weeping mother who used the powerful reach of television news to mask the ultimate betrayal of her own family. Yet the disturbing phenomenon of a predator looking directly into a news camera to spin webs of deception while their victims lie cold and hidden is not unique to Union, South Carolina. Just 24 years later, halfway across the country in the state of Colorado, another frantic parent would stand before local television microphones, pleading for the return of his missing family while concealing an equally dark and unimaginable truth. The August sun beats down on a pristine suburban porch in Frederick, Colorado. News cameras frame a father wearing a North Carolina Tar Heels shirt. He stands before reporters with crossed arms. He looks directly into the lenses to beg the public for the safe return of his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters. He speaks of empty houses and missed smiles. He projects the image of a devastated family man waiting for a miracle. Yet just outside the frame of the television broadcast, local detectives stand on the manicured lawn. They watch his cold, tearless eyes and rigid posture. The investigators already possess a piece of security footage contradicting his entire timeline. The man pleading for his family is the exact same individual who made them disappear. Frederick, Colorado, in mid-2018 offered a picture-perfect vision of suburban tranquility. The neighborhood known as Windham Hill featured winding sidewalks, freshly paved streets, and expansive homes clad in neutral stucco and stone. At the center of this quiet community stood a sprawling 5-bedroom house on Saratoga Trail. Chris and Shannon Watts occupied this residence with their 2 young daughters, Bella, who was 4 years old, and Ceciless, who was 3 years old. Shan was 15 weeks pregnant with a boy they planned to name Nico to the outside world. Their daily existence resembled a flawless digital catalog of domestic bliss. Shannon documented their family milestones, vacations, and daily routines through extensive social media broadcasts. Neighbors noticed the couple tending to their manicured lawn or walking their dog down the sunlit pavement. Beneath the polished veneer of their suburban dream, a crushing reality of financial ruin and emotional disconnect festered out of public view. Shannon functioned as the primary driving force within the household. She built a lucrative career working as an independent promoter for a health and wellness lifestyle company. Her daily routine involved packaging nutritional patches, coordinating online sales teams, and traveling for corporate conventions. She maintained an unwavering focus on providing a comfortable, upwardly mobile life for Bella and Celeste. The girls spent their days in specialized preschool programs, wearing matching outfits, and participating in numerous family activities. Shannon managed the family finances, scheduled every medical appointment, and organized the complex logistics of their busy lives. She believed her marriage was merely experiencing a temporary rough patch due to the upcoming arrival of their 3rd child. She spent weeks researching relationship counseling and purchasing self-help books to repair the growing distance. She remained unaware that her husband had already checked out of their family dynamic entirely. Chris Watts presented himself as an introverted, agreeable husband who quietly supported his driven wife. He worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum Corporation. He spent long hours driving a company truck to various remote oil field locations. His daily uniform consisted of heavy flame-retardant work shirts, steel-toed boots, and safety glasses. While Shannon shared their lives online, Chris preferred to fade into the background. During the summer of 2018, he initiated a clandestine relationship with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. He began spending his evenings researching secluded vacation destinations, browsing apartment rentals, and planning a separate future. He lied to his new partner, claiming he was already undergoing a legal separation and finalizing a divorce. The financial strain of an impending foreclosure on the Saratoga Trail house compounded his desire to escape his current life. He chose the most devastating method imaginable to erase his debts and family obligations. The final weekend of their lives began with a profound sense of physical separation. Shannon traveled to Scottsdale, Arizona for a corporate leadership convention, leaving Chris at home with the girls. During her trip, a series of declined credit card transactions revealed a hidden evening. Chris had spent hours at a local sports bar, racking up a bill that did not align with a solo dinner. Shannon texted her friends in distress, expressing deep anxiety about his distant behavior and unexplained expenses. Her return flight to Denver faced severe weather delays, pushing her arrival deep into the early morning hours. Chris remained inside the silent house on Saratoga Trail, awake and fully aware of her impending return. The heavy wooden front door finally unlocked at 1:48 in the morning on August 13, 2018. A colleague dropped Shannon off in the driveway, watching her wheel a small suitcase up to the illuminated porch. The colleague waited for her to enter the house before driving away into the darkness. The interior geography of the Saratoga Trail house featured a vast open-concept main floor that led to a towering central staircase. The master bedroom occupied the upper level, positioned directly across the hall from the rooms where Bella and Celeste slept. Shannon carried her luggage up the carpeted steps. Exhausted from the delayed travel and the emotional weight of her failing marriage, she entered the master suite, where Chris waited in the shadows of their shared bed. A profound confrontation erupted regarding the emotional chasm between them and the reality of his infidelities. The specific dialogue remains lost to history, but the resulting actions permanently shattered the quiet suburban night. Chris initiated a physical assault against his pregnant wife. He utilized his significant weight and strength to overpower her. He placed his heavy hands around her neck, cutting off the vital flow of oxygen. He maintained a vice-like grip until the struggle ceased, and she took her final breath upon the mattress. The horror of the night did not conclude with the end of Shannon and her unborn son. The resulting commotion awakened at least one of the young girls, who wandered into the hallway, clutching a small blanket. Chris faced a crucial juncture, staring at the innocent face of his child. He chose self-preservation and monstrous silence over mercy. He wrapped Shannon in a fitted bedsheet, dragging her rigid form down the carpeted stairs. He pulled his company-issued Ford truck into the enclosed garage, shielding his actions from the street lamps outside. He loaded his wife into the cramped floorboard of the back seat. He then instructed his two bewildered daughters to climb into the truck, sitting them mere inches from their mother. He secured the garage door and drove away into the desolate darkness of the Colorado Plains. The sun rose over Frederick a few hours later, bringing immediate suspicion from those who knew Shannon best. Her close friend Nicole Atkinson grew alarmed when Shannon failed to respond to text messages. Nicole knew Shan never missed a prenatal appointment. The medical clinic confirmed she had not arrived for her scheduled ultrasound. Nicole drove directly to Saratoga Trail, pressing the doorbell and peering through the front windows to observe the pacing family dog. The garage windows revealed that Shannon's personal vehicle remained parked in its usual spot. Nicole dialed the local emergency dispatch, demanding a welfare check on her pregnant friend. Officer Scott Coonrod arrived in a marked cruiser, activating his chest-mounted body camera. A frustrating jurisdictional barrier immediately presented itself to the responding officer. Colorado state law prevented Officer Coonrod from forcibly breaching the exterior doors without explicit evidence of a violent emergency occurring inside. Officer Coonrod instructed Nicole to contact Chris, forcing the absent husband to return from his oil field job site. Chris arrived 45 minutes later, pulling his work truck into the driveway with a calculated lack of urgency. He opened the front door, allowing the police and friends to sweep the interior of the pristine residence. The officers discovered Shannon's essential medications, her purse, and her mobile phone abandoned on the kitchen island. The upstairs beds were stripped of their sheets, and an eerie silence hung in the stale air-conditioned air. Chris attempted to feign ignorance, claiming they had engaged in an emotional discussion before he left for work. The investigation shifted abruptly when a neighbor, Nate Trinastich, invited Officer Coonrod into his adjacent living room. Nate possessed a high-definition surveillance camera mounted to his roof, pointing directly at the Watts driveway. The digital footage clearly displayed Chris backing his truck into the garage at 5 in the morning, Crucially, the camera proved that absolutely no one else had entered or exited the home since Shannon arrived. By the morning of August 14th, the Frederick Police Department requested immediate assistance from higher authorities. Agents from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation descended upon the small suburban command center. They initiated deep background checks, unearthing the digital footprints of his clandestine relationship with Nicole Kessinger. While agents gathered search warrants, Chris stepped onto his front porch to address the gathering local news stations. He stood before the microphones offering empty platitudes and generic pleas while avoiding the use of their actual names. Behavioral analysts at the federal level noted his alarming lack of distress, his crossed arms, and his inappropriate smirks. The local police formally requested that he undergo a standardized polygraph examination to clear his name. Chris arrogantly agreed, believing his superficial calm would allow him to outsmart a seasoned federal interrogator. He walked through the glass doors of the local police station, unaware of the psychological trap awaiting him. Special Agent Tammy Lee conducted the polygraph examination inside a sterile, windowless room illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting. She attached corrugated rubber tubes around his chest and abdomen to measure his respiratory patterns. She secured heavy blood pressure cuffs to his upper arm and fastened metal galvanic skin sensors to his fingertips. Agent Lee established a baseline by asking mundane questions about his background, his employment, and his daily routines. She then transitioned into direct inquiries regarding the physical whereabouts of his pregnant wife and 2 small daughters. Chris maintained his flat effect, but his internal physiological responses spiked with every fabricated denial. The sophisticated sensors recorded massive fluctuations in his blood pressure and erratic changes in his sweat gland activity. After unhooking the intricate wires, Agent Lee looked directly into his eyes and informed him he had failed the examination. She utilized a specific psychological interrogation technique, subtly suggesting that perhaps Shannon had harmed the children first. The suggestion offered Chris a temporary, cowardly avenue to shift the blame away from his total culpability. The investigators brought his father, Ronnie Watts, into the interrogation room to break down his remaining emotional barriers. Chris sat in a rigid plastic chair, leaning forward to whisper a fabricated sequence of events to his father. He claimed he witnessed Shannon harming the girls via baby monitor, and in a fit of rage, he ended her life. The veteran detectives recognized this partial admission as a classic minimization technique used by cornered perpetrators. They pressed him further, demanding the precise geographic coordinates of the remains to grant the grieving family proper closure. Chris finally provided a written map detailing the desolate layout of the Serviv 319 oil battery site. Law enforcement tactical units mobilized instantly, dispatching armored vehicles and forensic excavation teams to the dusty plains of Weld County. The sprawling investigation had broken the facade, shifting from a desperate search and rescue mission to a grim recovery operation. The physical reality of the Serviv 319 site consisted of massive, towering steel tanks surrounded by dry, cracked earth. Detectives arrived at the desolate perimeter, battling the deafening hum of cicadas and the overwhelming stench of raw petroleum. The chronological timeline of the early morning hours of August 13th snapped into absolute horrifying clarity. After driving through the darkness, Chris parked his truck near a shallow depression in the barren dirt. He pulled his wife from the floorboards, dragging her through the rough scrub brush to a hastily dug trench. He buried her in the shallow earth, leaving her remains exposed to the elements and the searing morning heat. He then returned to the idling truck where Bella and Celesta sat huddled together in the back seat. The ultimate betrayal of trust unfolded in the shadows of the towering industrial structures. He approached his youngest daughter first, utilizing a small security blanket to steal her future. He carried her small form up a steep set of metal stairs leading to the top of the massive crude oil batteries. He forced her through a narrow 8 inches hatch at the summit, dropping her into the toxic darkness below. He then returned for his oldest daughter, ignoring her desperate pleas and utilizing the exact same horrific method to silence her forever. He scaled the metal stairs a second time, dropping her into a separate towering steel tank filled with corrosive chemicals. He secured the heavy metallic latches, sealing his own flesh and blood within an industrial tomb. He drove back to Frederick, calmly showering and texting his new girlfriend as if nothing had altered his routine. The absolute depravity of his actions stood in stark contrast to the quiet suburban life he had left behind. The forensic teams at the Service 319 site faced an unprecedented and psychologically devastating recovery process. Specialized hazardous materials crews arrived to drain hundreds of gallons of combustible fluid from the massive industrial tanks. The heavy metallic click of wrenches echoed across the plains as workers unbolted the inspection hatches at the base of the structures. The investigators made the grim discovery, extracting the small victims from the caustic environment. The physical evidence completely shattered Chris's fabricated story of a spontaneous reactive assault inside the master bedroom. The calculated disposal proved intense premeditation and a chilling disregard for human existence. Detectives placed the steel handcuffs upon his wrists, permanently removing him from the general population. The monstrous entity who had pleaded for their return on national television was locked inside a concrete cell. The judicial process advanced in a matter of weeks, driven by the overwhelming mountain of forensic evidence and digital data. In November 2018, the district attorney presented a comprehensive plea agreement to the defense team. To avoid the lengthy appellate process of a capital punishment trial, Chris Watts agreed to plead guilty to all charges. He officially admitted his absolute guilt regarding the brutal end of his wife, his unborn son, and his 2 daughters. The court proceedings took place in a somber, heavily guarded courtroom filled with weeping family members and hardened law enforcement officials. Shannon's parents delivered crushing victim impact statements, expressing a profound devastation that no legal remedy could ever heal. They spoke of stolen birthdays, empty chairs at holiday dinners, and the enduring nightmare of trusting a predator. The legal maneuvering stripped away the final remnants of his false suburban identity, exposing the hollow void beneath. Judge Marcelo Kopkow presided over the final sentencing. Gazing down at the defendant with visible contempt, the judge described the case as one of the most inhumane and vicious crimes he had ever encountered in his lengthy career on the bench. He handed down 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He added an additional 84 years for the unlawful termination of a pregnancy and tampering with deceased bodies. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing his fate behind maximum security prison walls. Chris Watts was transferred out of Colorado to a high-security facility in Wisconsin due to extreme safety concerns. He spends his days confined to a small concrete cell, forced to live with the permanent echoes of his catastrophic choices. The house on Saratoga Trail remains an empty, haunting monument to the unimaginable horrors that occurred within its pristine walls. The tragedy serves as a terrifying reminder that the most profound threats do not always break through a window in the dead of night. Sometimes, the monster sleeps on the other side of the mattress, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Law enforcement agencies utilized every available tool to expose the darkness hiding behind a carefully crafted suburban smile. The community of Frederick slowly attempted to heal, planting memorial trees and dedicating quiet spaces to the memory of Shannon, Bella, and Celeste. The public fascination with the deceptive nature of killers continued to evolve as new mysteries surfaced. Far away from the quiet plains of Colorado, another community found itself terrorized by a completely different kind of predator. In August 1969, the San Francisco Bay Area plunged into chaos when 3 newspapers received a cryptic puzzle from a phantom who demanded the front page. August 1st, 1969, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner all receive identical handwritten letters. The envelopes contain pieces of a complex encrypted cipher. The anonymous writer issues a terrifying ultimatum. He demands his ciphers be printed on the front page of the newspapers immediately. If the editors refuse, he promises that multiple innocent people will meet a sudden permanent end over the weekend. The public manipulation begins, and a sprawling metropolitan area is plunged into unprecedented paranoia. The late 1960s Bay Area projected a culture of peace, yet a chilling darkness was slowly gathering along its rural outskirts. Fog frequently rolled in over the coastal hills, creating a stark contrast to the buzzing neon signs of local diners. The geography of the region played a crucial role in the impending tragedies. Solano County featured numerous isolated access roads and quiet lovers' lanes surrounded by desolate pump stations. Lake Herman Road in Vallejo represented one of these secluded pockets. It was a winding, unlit stretch of gravel, bordered by rolling hills and heavy brush. The physical isolation offered absolute silence away from the city center. There were no streetlights, no nearby houses, and no passing traffic after midnight. This geographic void created an ideal hunting ground for a predator seeking total control. The perfect stillness of the environment would soon be permanently shattered by an unseen threat. The human cost of this geographic isolation began with two promising local teenagers. Betty Lou Jensen was a 16-year-old high school honor student experiencing her very first official date. David Faraday was a 17-year-old Eagle Scout known for his bright future and responsible nature. They represented the quintessential youth of their era, filled with optimism and deeply connected to their community. They promised Betty Lou's parents they would return home by 11:30 at night. On the night of December 20th, 1968, the couple sought a quiet moment away from their peers. They parked a Rambler station wagon on the cold gravel shoulder of Lake Herman Road. The freezing night sky offered a pristine view of the stars above the empty landscape. They sat together inside the vehicle, completely unaware that they were entirely cut off from any potential help. The darkness enveloping the car masked the approach of a devastating force. The profound isolation of the road meant there were absolutely no witnesses to the impending nightmare. Another vehicle eventually pulled up nearby, its tires crunching heavily against the loose gravel. Footsteps approached the passenger side of the parked Rambler in the dead of night. A harsh, blinding light illuminated the teenagers, trapping them in a state of absolute confusion. The sudden, shattering discharge of a firearm permanently ended their bright futures right there on the cold asphalt. David and Betty Lou were left behind in the freezing darkness without any chance of survival. The local Vallejo Police Department arrived hours later to a baffling and chaotic scene. Investigators found no clear motive, no signs of theft, and no immediate suspects hiding in the surrounding hills. This initial tragedy highlighted a critical vulnerability in local law enforcement protocols. The isolated rural jurisdiction lacked the forensic resources required to track a completely random act of violence. The nightmare escalated dramatically on July 4, 1969. The location shifted to Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, another secluded parking area situated just 4 miles away from Lake Herman Road. The physical space consisted of a dark, paved lot heavily bordered by a dense golf course and thick trees. Darlene Farron, 22 years old, and Michael Mago, 19 years old, sat inside Darlene's Corvair discussing their evening. A secondary car pulled into the empty lot, parked briefly, turned off its headlights, and then sped away into the night. The strange vehicle returned exactly 10 minutes later, positioning itself deliberately behind Darlene's car to block any potential escape route. A male figure stepped out of the vehicle holding a bright flashlight directly in front of his face. The intense beam of light blinded Darlene and Michael, making it impossible to see the man's features. He approached the passenger side window with steady, calculated steps. The trap was set before the victims even realized they were in danger. The unknown attacker unleashed a barrage of gunfire into the vehicle without uttering a single word. Michael suffered severe life-altering injuries but managed to survive by instinctively taking cover in the back seat. Darlene tragically lost her life, her future stolen in a matter of seconds. Exactly 40 minutes later, at 12:40 in the morning, the Vallejo Police Department switchboard received a highly disturbing phone call. The male caller spoke in a slow, calculated, and deeply monotone cadence. He explicitly claimed responsibility for the Blue Rock Springs attack and provided specific details about the weapons used. Furthermore, he explicitly took credit for the Lake Herman Road tragedy that had occurred 7 months prior. The chilling reality suddenly set in for the local authorities. They were not dealing with isolated incidents of gang violence or personal vendettas. They were hunting a serial predator who actively craved an audience. The tactical shift to psychological warfare officially began less than a month later. On August 1, 1969, the 3 envelopes arrived at the major newspaper offices in San Francisco and Vallejo. The writer issued rigid demands insisting the enclosed ciphers be printed on the front pages by Friday afternoon. The threat was explicit, outlining a plan for a weekend rampage if the press refused to comply with his strict orders. The local police departments faced an unprecedented and highly dangerous public relations dilemma. A nameless phantom was holding the entire Bay Area hostage through the media, wielding fear as his primary weapon. He essentially forced the victims' grieving families to read the twisted words of the person who destroyed their lives. This represented a profound emotional torture, placing his narcissistic demands right next to the daily news. The authorities realized they were dealing with a manipulator who understood the immense power of public perception. The investigation rapidly transformed from a local homicide case into a statewide media circus. The publication of the cipher triggered a massive public response and forced the perpetrator to escalate his communication. The Vallejo police chief strategically requested the anonymous writer send a second letter to prove his identity and confirm the horrifying details. On August 7, 1969, the writer responded with a terrifying opening line that stated, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The self-assigned moniker permanently etched itself into the history of American crime. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and local authorities immediately struggled with overlapping jurisdictional boundaries and fragmented evidence. Vallejo police held the physical evidence from the first 2 attacks, but interagency communication relied heavily on slow postal mail and physical meetings. The complex encrypted cipher was ultimately cracked not by supercomputers or federal agents, but by a high school teacher and his wife Donald and Betty Hardin. The decrypted text revealed the deeply disturbing psychological void of the perpetrator. He claimed he was collecting souls to serve him in the afterlife, highlighting a profound detachment from reality. The revelation shifted the focus from finding a rational motive to profiling a severely disturbed individual. The predator shifted his hunting grounds on September 27, 1969. The new location was Lake Berryessa in Napa County, a serene, sunlit reservoir flanked by ancient oak trees located 70 miles north of San Francisco. The physical geography offered a false sense of security, surrounded by quiet waters and rolling hills. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard relaxed on a blanket near the water edge, enjoying the peaceful afternoon sunlight. A man abruptly emerged from the tree line, shattering the tranquility of the isolated cove. The physical horror was immediate and striking as the man wore a square black executioner hood. A white crossed circle symbol was meticulously stitched onto the chest of the dark fabric. He held a firearm and carried several pieces of pre-cut plastic clothesline on his belt. He demanded money and the keys to their car, claiming he was an escaped convict fleeing from a Montana prison. He forced Cecilia to tie Brian up securely. and then he bound Cecilia himself, taking total physical control of the situation. The terrifying deception shattered the moment the victims were rendered completely defenseless. The attacker did not rob them of their money or steal their vehicle as he had promised. He produced a bladed weapon and inflicted severe, agonizing wounds on both of the bound college students. He then turned his back on the victims and walked deliberately up the hill toward Brian's parked car. He used a thick black marker to write the exact dates of his previous Vallejo attacks directly onto the car door. He added the current date and time, signing the message with his infamous crossed circle symbol. Napa County Sheriff deputies arrived hours later after a local fisherman heard faint calls for help echoing across the water. Brian miraculously survived the brutal encounter, despite his extensive injuries. Celia tragically passed away 2 days later in the hospital, her future permanently erased. The jurisdictional map expanded yet again, forcing 3 distinct county sheriff and police departments to scramble for shared forensic data through carbon copy reports and teletype machines. On October 11, 1969, the predator fundamentally shifted his tactics once more. He moved away from rural, isolated landscapes and entered the densely populated urban grid of San Francisco. The chosen location was Presidio Heights, an affluent, quiet neighborhood lined with grand houses, manicured lawns, and bright sodium street lamps. Paul Steen, a 29-year-old dedicated cab driver, picked up a seemingly normal passenger in the downtown district. The requested destination was the intersection of Washington Street and Maple Street. The yellow cab arrived in the quiet residential neighborhood shortly before 10 o'clock at night. The passenger discharged a weapon directly into Paul's head, stealing his life instantly in the front seat of the vehicle. The attacker then took Paul's keys and his wallet, searching the vehicle for any valuable items. Before fleeing the scene, the perpetrator carefully tore a large piece of Paul's stained shirt to keep as a twisted trophy. The physical reality of the crime scene was contained entirely within the confined space of the taxi. The immediate aftermath of this urban attack resulted in a historic and infuriating systemic failure. 3 teenagers watched the horrifying scene unfold from a second-story window directly across the street. They immediately called the San Francisco Police Department, providing a real-time account of the fleeing suspect. The communication breakdown occurred at the dispatch center, creating a massive tactical error. The police dispatcher mistakenly broadcast the suspect profile as a black male instead of a white male. 2 patrol officers, Donald Fouke and Eric Zelms, responded rapidly to the emergency broadcast. 2 blocks away from the active crime scene, they drove past a heavy-set white man wearing glasses and walking down the sidewalk. Because of the strictly flawed dispatch description, the officers did not stop the man for questioning. They unknowingly let the most sought-after phantom in California walk directly past their cruiser. The attacker slipped quietly into the dark, expansive woods of the nearby Presidio Park, completely evading capture due to a simple administrative mistake. The psychological torture of the public reached its absolute peak on October 13, 1969. The San Francisco Chronicle received a new envelope containing a letter that viciously mocked the police for their colossal failure in Presidio Heights. Included in the envelope was the torn, stained piece of Paul Steen's shirt, proving absolute verification of the writer's identity. The perpetrator then escalated his threats by promising to target a local school bus. He explicitly described a detailed plan to shoot out the front tire of a bus and attack the children as they helplessly exited the vehicle. Absolute panic consumed Northern California, forcing parents to keep their children home from school. Armed patrol cars physically followed school buses along their daily routes to prevent an attack. The police departments were soon paralyzed by hundreds of false confessions and useless tips from panicked citizens. Investigators wasted thousands of crucial man-hours chasing completely fabricated dead-end leads. The genuine perpetrator vanished into the thick San Francisco fog, hiding in plain sight while an entire state trembled. The horrifying letters continued to arrive at newspaper offices throughout 1970 and 1971. The writer sent disturbing greeting cards, complex geographic diagrams, and new ciphers that completely defied federal crypt analysts. He mocked the San Francisco police chief and taunted specific newspaper columnists by name. He even demanded that everyday citizens wear lapel pins bearing his crossed circle symbol as a sign of submission. The entire Bay Area was forced to involuntarily participate in his twisted, one-sided media circus. Law enforcement amassed massive sprawling case files, relentlessly pursuing high-profile suspects like Arthur Leigh Allen. Numerous search warrants were executed, residential trailers were inspected, and countless handwriting samples were taken from potential persons of interest. Yet the physical evidence never conclusively matched the primary suspects. The partial fingerprints recovered from the taxicab, the palm prints lifted from the letters, and the ballistic reports consistently pointed in divergent directions. The frustrating reality was that the evidence was just degraded enough to prevent a definitive legal indictment. The psychological grip on the public tightened, even as the physical attacks appeared to cease. The grim realization slowly dawned on the exhausted federal and local investigators. The perpetrator was likely not a criminal mastermind, but rather a cowardly opportunist, hiding behind a carefully crafted persona. He relied entirely on primitive communication and calculated terror tactics to project a false sense of absolute power over the authorities. The final confirmed communication arrived in 1974, reviewing a popular horror film and claiming an unverified victim count of 37. Then absolute and permanent silence fell over the investigation. The Phantom simply ceased writing his letters and disappeared into the fabric of everyday society. He walked away on his own terms, leaving the police with boxes of degrading evidence and the victims' families with an agonizing, permanent void. The ultimate horror of this case was not a dramatic shootout or a definitive courtroom capture. The true horror was the quiet, mundane fading of a monster back into normal society without facing any earthly consequences. Decades slowly dissolved into a new century, leaving the infamous case entirely unresolved. The strict jurisdictional boundaries that once hampered the initial investigation eventually gave way to shared digital law enforcement databases. However, the immense damage caused by the early delays and communication errors proved entirely irreversible. The Vallejo Police Department, the Napa County Sheriff, and the San Francisco Police Department maintain fully open and active case files to this day. In the year 2021, an independent group of investigators known as the Case Breakers announced they had identified the perpetrator. They based their highly publicized conclusion on circumstantial forensic ties and old darkroom photographs found in a suspect's belongings. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and local California authorities immediately released statements refusing to validate the independent claim. Law enforcement officially noted that no conclusive DNA match or definitive physical evidence linked the proposed suspect to the verified crime scenes. The official stance remains rigid and unchanged across all involved jurisdictions. No one has ever been charged, and the file remains definitively open. The true, enduring tragedy remains deeply anchored in the stolen lives of the actual victims. Betty Lou Jensen, David Faraday, Delene Farron, Cecilia Shepard, and Paul Steen were ruthlessly robbed of their futures merely to feed the massive ego of a sadist. Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell carry the profound physical and psychological scars of their terrifying survival. The perpetrator weaponized the local press to broadcast his terror, essentially forcing those grieving families to endure his mocking words on front pages across the nation. He systematically engineered his own twisted legacy while escaping the very justice system he so deeply despised. The systemic failures of the 1960s allowed a dangerous predator to slip through the cracks of a fragmented law enforcement network. The Phantom of the Bay Area proved that sometimes monsters actively manipulate the spotlight. taunt the authorities, and slip away without a single trace. The terror of a manipulative predator, however, is not unique to California's foggy coastlines. Far away from the neon lights of San Francisco, another nightmare was brewing in the American heartland. It involved a mother who would eventually stand in front of news cameras to plead for her missing 5-year-old boy while harboring a terrifying, permanent secret of her own. Television cameras crowd the damp pavement of Dole Avenue in Crystal Lake, Illinois. A mother stands before a bank of microphones, her face drawn, weeping for the safe return of her 5-year-old son. She begs the community to check their sheds, their parks, their backyards. The local news broadcasts her tearful pleas across the state, rallying thousands of desperate volunteers. Yet behind the lens, seasoned detectives watch her body language with a creeping sense of dread. The tears do not reach her eyes, and her timeline fractures under the slightest scrutiny. This grieving mother is looking into the camera, pleading for a child she already knows is never coming home. Crystal Lake, Illinois sits 45 miles northwest of Chicago, boasting tranquil parks and affluent suburban neighborhoods. Families flock to this area for the top-rated schools and the quiet, tree-lined streets curving around the shimmering water of the town lake. A stark contrast exists at a specific address on Dole Avenue. The structure stands out like a decaying tooth among well-kept lawns, its white paint peeling away to reveal rotting wood beneath. The front yard is choked with overgrown weeds and discarded debris. Inside, the environment spirals into total chaos, with animal waste coating the floorboards and heavy padlocks securing the bedroom doors from the outside. The suffocating odor of decay hits anyone stepping over the threshold. This dilapidated structure is the home of Joan Cunningham and Andrew Frone Sr. They are raising their 5-year-old son, Andrew Jr., known to the community as AJ. Little AJ is a bright, smiling child with striking blonde hair, known for seeking affection from anyone paying him attention. His daily reality is a terrifying cycle of neglect and psychological torment inflicted by the very people supposed to protect him. State child welfare workers operating under the Department of Children and Family Services are no strangers to the house on Dole Avenue. Caseworkers have walked through the foul-smelling hallways multiple times, documenting the hazardous conditions and the profound lack of basic necessities. Bureaucratic loopholes allow the parents to wave away concerns with empty promises of cleaning the house and attending counseling. The system operates under a rigid mandate favoring family reunification over child safety. State workers close the files and drive away from the property, leaving the 5-year-old trapped behind a locked wooden door. Each ignored warning sign paves a concrete path toward an inevitable devastating conclusion. The illusion of normalcy shatters on the morning of April 18, 2019. At 9 in the morning, Andrew Frone Sr. dials 911. His voice calm for a man delivering catastrophic news. He tells the emergency dispatcher his son has vanished from his bedroom. He claims he went to wake the boy for a doctor appointment, only to find an empty bed and an open window. Patrol officers arrive at Dole Avenue within minutes, their heavy boots crunching over the debris littering the front porch. They secure the perimeter, walking the fence line and inspecting the window the father claims was left ajar. The spatial layout of the property does not align with the narrative of a wandering child or an outside intruder. The window frame shows no signs of forced entry, and the dust on the sill remains undisturbed. The police step inside the suffocating house, their flashlights cutting through the gloom, searching under piles of discarded clothing and broken furniture. The initial sweep yields nothing, prompting law enforcement to escalate the situation into a major missing child crisis. Police issue a regional alert, transmitting the photograph and physical description of AJ to every active unit across the county. Within hours, the quiet suburban streets of Crystal Lake transform into a massive command center. Helicopters thud overhead, their rotors shaking the autumn leaves, while search and rescue teams deploy tracking dogs through the nearby woods and marshlands. Detectives separate Joanne and Andrew, sitting them down at the kitchen table to establish a timeline of the previous evening. Joanne claims she put her son to bed around 9 o'clock the night before, tucking him in and closing the door. She maintains a rigid posture, repeating the same sequence of events without showing the frantic panic typical of a parent missing a young child. The investigators note her flat tone and the chilling lack of urgency in her voice. This disjointed emotional response acts as the first major red flag for the investigative team. Over the next 48 hours, the search grid expands across thousands of acres of dense Illinois timber and suburban subdivisions. 400 volunteers stand shoulder to shoulder, beating the tall grass and calling out the young boy's name. Specialized dive teams plunge into the frigid waters of Crystal Lake, scanning the murky bottom with sonar equipment. Back on Dole Avenue, detectives bring in crime scene to technicians to process the house with chemical reagents and ultraviolet light. The physical state of the resident shocks the hardened forensic specialists. They document floors caked with animal waste, rusted tools scattered near children's toys, and the distinct absence of any recent child activity in the boy's bedroom. A deeper dive into the police database reveals a staggering history of documented failures by state authorities. Just 4 months prior, in December of 2018, an officer noticed a massive bruise on the hip of the child and requested state intervention. A state doctor examined the boy, but due to a catastrophic jurisdictional loophole, the agency classified the injury as unfounded because they could not definitively prove which parent caused it. While search teams comb the muddy riverbanks, Jan and Andrew make a calculated decision to address the media gathering at the end of their driveway. They stand side by side in front of the flashing cameras, projecting the image of a united, heartbroken couple. Joanne looks into the news lenses, her voice trembling just enough to mimic genuine despair. She begs the public to keep looking, stating she just wants her baby back home, where he belongs. Andrew stands beside her, echoing her pleas and praising the community for their tireless efforts. The local news stations broadcast these interviews on a continuous loop, drawing in an outpouring of public sympathy and donations. Inside the police station, behavioral analysts dissect every frame of these television appearances. They observe the fleeting micro-expressions of contempt on the face of the mother and the stiff, rehearsed cadence of the father. The detectives realize the parents are performing a constructed script to deflect mounting suspicion. The investigation takes a sharp turn on April 20, 2019, when detectives execute a digital search warrant on the cellular devices of the parents. Cyber technicians connect the confiscated phones to forensic extraction software, pulling thousands of deleted text messages, location pings, and hidden files. The extraction process is slow, taking hours to reconstruct the fragmented data chains buried deep within the memory of the devices. As the digital timeline rebuilds itself, investigators discover a series of incriminating internet searches made in the days leading up to the 911 call. The search queries include questions about child resuscitation and inquiries into how state authorities investigate fatal events. More damning, the cell tower data places the phone belonging to Andrew several miles away from the Dole Avenue residence in the early morning hours of April 15. This geographic footprint directly contradicts his written statement asserting he never left the house on the night his son vanished. The physical evidence is catching up to the web of deception. Armed with this digital roadmap, detectives pivot their focus from a rescue mission to a localized criminal investigation. They secure the entire Dole Avenue property with yellow tape, blocking the parents from re-entering the premises. Joanne is brought into an interrogation room equipped with 2 cameras, a heavy metal table, and 0 distractions. Two seasoned investigators take the seats across from her, laying out the glaring inconsistencies in her bedtime story. They present the deleted text messages, reading her own hostile words regarding her son out loud in the cramped room. Joanne crosses her arms, refusing to break eye contact, and stubbornly sticks to her fabricated timeline. She demands to know why the police are wasting time talking to her instead of searching the local parks. Her defiance is an astonishing display of psychological control, maintaining a victimized persona even as the walls of evidence close in around her. The detectives recognize they cannot break her, so they turn their attention to the weaker link in the partnership. In an adjacent interrogation room, Andrew Froon Sr. sits, hunched in a plastic chair, sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights. Investigators adopt a different tactic with him, utilizing a slow, methodical unraveling of his fragile ego. They map out the cell phone pings on a whiteboard, pinpointing his exact location on a rural road outside of town on the night in question. They describe the heavy burden of carrying a secret, offering him a way to distance himself from the aggressive dominance of his partner. The detectives speak softly, contrasting the overwhelming digital evidence against his crumbling story. Hour after hour, they chip away at his rehearsed narrative, forcing him to explain the 2.5-minute gap where his phone connected to a distant tower in Woodstock, Illinois. The continuous pressure, combined with the sheer volume of indisputable data, fractures his resolve. His shoulders collapse, his breathing grows shallow, and the facade of the desperate father disintegrates. The turning point arrives on April 24, 2019. Andrew can no longer maintain the lie. The pressure crushes him. He asks for a pen and a piece of paper. His hands shake. He draws a crude map of a rural road located 8 miles away from their Crystal Lake home. He points to a small cluster of trees near a utility pole in the town of Woodstock. The investigators dispatch a specialized recovery team to the exact coordinates on the hand-drawn paper. The tactical vans speed down the empty country roads, leaving the suburban streets far behind. They arrive at a desolate, muddy field surrounded by thick brush. The recovery team steps out into the biting wind. The area is silent. They follow the hand-drawn map past a rusted wire fence. 10 yards into the tree line, a forensic technician spots a patch of freshly overturned earth. The soil is loose, covered with a few discarded branches. The team begins a slow, methodical excavation. The shovels scrape against the frozen ground. Minutes later, the grim reality of the situation surfaces. They uncover the remains of the young boy wrapped in thick plastic. The physical evidence tells a devastating story of prolonged suffering. The timeline locks into place. The horrific truth crystallizes for the investigative team. AJ did not wander away into the night. He met a brutal, permanent end inside the house on Dole Avenue on April 15. This means he was already gone 3 days before the frantic 911 call. The implications are staggering. Joanne Cunningham stood before the flashing cameras. She looked into the lenses. She shed tears and begged the public for help. She accepted the prayers and donations of a terrified community. All the while, she knew her son was wrapped in plastic, buried in a shallow grave miles away. The arrests of Joanne Cunningham and Andrew Froon Sr. send shock waves of fury through the tight-knit community of Crystal Lake. The revelation that the parents orchestrated the massive search to cover their own action sparks absolute outrage. In July of 2020, facing an insurmountable mountain of forensic and digital evidence, Joanne Cunningham stands before a judge in a silent courtroom. She enters a guilty plea to the primary criminal charges to avoid a lengthy and highly publicized trial. The judge sentences her to 35 years in state prison, ensuring she will spend the majority of her natural life behind heavy steel doors. Andrew Froon Sr. accepts a plea deal for his role in the aftermath, pleading guilty to lesser charges including the concealment of a fatal event. The court hands him a 30-year sentence, permanently dismantling the toxic partnership that claimed an innocent life. The fallout from this tragedy extends far beyond the walls of the courtroom. The catastrophic failure of the state child welfare system triggers a massive legislative audit in Illinois. Lawmakers draft new protocols aimed at closing the very loopholes allowing caseworkers to walk away from the Dole Avenue house. Several state employees face direct disciplinary action for ignoring the glaring red flags documented in the months leading up to the crisis. The community eventually tears down the decaying house on Dole Avenue, replacing the horrific reminder with an empty, quiet lot. Little AJ is granted the peace in death he was so ruthlessly denied in life. Yet, while the people of Crystal Lake grapple with the betrayal of a mother who weaponized the media, another community miles away is about to face an even more chilling predator. Down in Georgia, a brilliant law student is stepping in front of a local news camera, unaware the reporter is about to ask a question that will unravel his entire life. June 30, 2011. A local news reporter stands on a sweltering sidewalk in Macon, Georgia, interviewing a nervous, lanky law school graduate about his missing neighbor. The young man rambles about the neighborhood, playing the role of a deeply concerned friend. Then, the reporter mentions that investigators just made a grim discovery in the trash bins next to the building. The man freezes, his face goes pale, and his knees buckle as the mask of innocence shatters on live television. In the early summer of 2011, Macon, Georgia, hummed with the quiet energy of a historic southern college town. Thick humidity hung in the air beneath canopies of massive oak trees lining Georgia Avenue, just across the street from the Mercer University Walter F. George School of Law sat a row of old, stately homes converted into student apartments. 27-year-old Lauren Giddings lived in a second-floor unit within one of these aging, wooden buildings. She possessed a radiant magnetic personality, drawing people to her with effortless kindness. Lauren had just completed her final semester of law school, standing on the absolute threshold of a promising legal career. She spent her days studying for the upcoming bar examination and walking her beloved dog around the historic district. Her apartment served as a safe haven, a quiet sanctuary positioned safely within a community entirely populated by her aspiring peers. Directly next door to Lauren lived her classmate, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel. The two apartments shared a thick interior wall, their front doors positioned merely a few paces apart on the same elevated wooden landing. McDaniel stood in stark contrast to his vibrant neighbor. He walked the campus with an awkward, rigid gait, rarely making eye contact and maintaining a deeply unsettling, intense demeanor. Many classmates actively avoided him, brushing off his bizarre comments as the eccentricities of an overly sheltered, hyper-intelligent misfit. Beneath this awkward exterior, he harbored dark, deeply ingrained fixations on torture and psychological control. He spent countless hours cloistered in his dark apartment, scrolling through unseemly internet forums while the rest of his peers socialized. Nobody recognized these behavioral anomalies as genuine red flags, allowing a severe threat to quietly fester in plain sight. The physical layout of the Georgia Avenue property offered a deeply flawed illusion of security. Heavy wooden doors and solid deadbolts provided a comforting barrier against the outside world. However, the building management utilized a master key system to access all the individual units for routine maintenance. This structural oversight created a massive vulnerability, entirely bypassing the heavy locks that tenants relied upon for safety. McDaniel understood the precise geography of the complex, meticulously mapping out the sightlines and blind spots surrounding the property. He spent weeks observing the daily routines of the other tenants, tracking exactly when the courtyard remained empty. The close proximity of his front door to Lauren's front door allowed him to monitor her movements with terrifying precision. He waited in the silence of his apartment, separated from his target by only a few inches of plaster and wood. The timeline of tragedy began to unfold during the final weekend of June. On the evening of June 25, Lauren ordered takeout food and settled into her apartment for a quiet night of studying. She exchanged a few final text messages with her friends discussing her plans for the following day. As the heavy southern night fell over the city, all communication from her phone abruptly ceased. The next morning, her friends expected to see her at a scheduled study session at the law library. She never arrived, and her calls went directly to an automated voicemail system. Initial worry quickly evolved into genuine panic as the hours dragged into days without a single word from the usually highly responsive student. By June 29, her frantic friends decided to intervene, traveling to the Georgia Avenue complex to check on her well-being. The group walked up the exterior wooden staircase, arriving at the second-floor landing shared by Lauren and McDaniel. They knocked heavily on her locked front door, receiving only deafening silence in response. Peering through the glass window panes, they observed no signs of movement inside the dimly lit apartment. The friends immediately contacted the Macon Police Department, requesting an urgent welfare check at the residence. Patrol officers arrived shortly after assessing the exterior of the building before forcing entry into the quiet unit. A wave of immense dread washed over the officers as they stepped across the threshold. The interior showed no obvious signs of a struggle, yet the atmosphere felt deeply wrong. Lauren was completely missing, but her purse, keys, and her anxious dog remained locked inside the apartment. Law enforcement immediately recognized the severe implications of an abandoned pet and a missing purse. People do not simply walk away from their entire lives without taking their most essential belongings. Detectives initiated a massive search grid, transforming the quiet historic district into a chaotic center of police activity. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking residents for any details regarding the missing student. During this frantic process, Stephen McDaniel stepped out of his apartment and willingly approached the investigators. He offered his assistance, answering their questions with a calm, seemingly cooperative tone. He portrayed himself as a concerned friend, eager to help locate the woman who lived just a few feet away. Investigators focused entirely on the broader neighborhood, initially viewed him simply as a helpful witness. The search expanded throughout Macon, pulling in resources from multiple surrounding jurisdictions. Detectives scoured local parks, abandoned buildings, and the dense woods bordering the Ogmulgee River. Meanwhile, McDaniel continued to insert himself directly into the center of the investigation. He lingered on the periphery of the police tape, watching the forensic teams comb through the courtyard. He spoke with visiting friends and family members, offering them words of false comfort while hiding his true nature. This behavior represents a classic psychological tactic used by predators to monitor the progress of an investigation. By staying close to the authorities, he attempted to anticipate their next moves and gauge their level of suspicion. However, his arrogant confidence blinded him to the inevitable trajectory of the forensic process. On the morning of June 30, local news crews set up their cameras on the sidewalk directly below the apartment balconies. A reporter approached McDaniel, asking for his perspective on the ongoing search for his missing classmate. He stared directly into the camera lens, delivering a disjointed, rambling account of his final interactions with Lauren. Mid-interview, the reporter informed him that police investigators had just located a major piece of evidence in the trash receptacles beside the building. McDaniel visibly recoiled, his entire body seizing in a sudden state of shock as the biological reality hit him. He repeatedly muttered disjointed phrases, struggling to maintain his composure while his breathing turned shallow and rapid. The television camera captured the exact moment his carefully constructed facade crumbled into pure, unadulterated panic. This broadcast immediately shifted the focus of the entire community, turning the cooperative neighbor into the primary focal point of the investigation, with probable cause firmly established by the grim discovery. Detectives executed a comprehensive search warrant on McDaniel's apartment. The interior of his unit revealed a disturbing, chaotic environment, completely devoid of normal social warmth. Investigators meticulously documented his living space, discovering a massive collection of unseemly printed materials and disturbing handwritten notes. Buried within the clutter, crime scene technicians uncovered the original cardboard packaging for a specific brand of hacksaw. They also located a stolen master key to the apartment complex, highlighting a catastrophic failure in the building's management protocols. The property managers had failed to secure the spare keys, leaving them accessible in a poorly monitored communal office. McDaniel exploited this systemic negligence, quietly stealing the master key long before the tragic weekend occurred. This single breach of protocol gave him absolute, unrestricted access to every locked door within the entire building. The physical evidence prompted the cybercrimes unit to seize and dissect his personal computers and digital storage devices. Digital forensic examiners worked around the clock, recovering thousands of deleted files scattered across fragmented hard drives. They unearthed a terrifying timeline of digital stalking that spanned several preceding years. McDaniel had secretly accessed Lauren's private social media accounts, constantly monitoring her daily schedule and personal communications. His search history contained extensive queries regarding human anatomy, decomposition rates, and specific methods for evading law enforcement. He researched how to bypass residential locks and exactly how to eliminate forensic trace evidence from carpets. The digital footprint painted a clear, undeniable picture of a highly organized individual planning a catastrophic event. Every recovered search term shattered the defense theory that the tragedy resulted from a sudden, unplanned confrontation. Beyond the digital realm, investigators uncovered evidence of intense physical-psychological warfare. Detectives found a digital video camera in his possession accompanied by a long wooden stick. McDaniel had attached the camera to this pole, using it to reach outward from his own window and film through Lauren's second-story blinds. The recovered video files showed her moving around her private sanctuary, entirely unaware of the lens watching her every move. He recorded these invasive videos during the deep hours of the night, stealing her safety while she remained totally oblivious. This immense violation of privacy underscores the profound terror inflicted by a threat hiding just inches away. He systematically invaded her life, gathering intelligence and waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. The investigation proved he was never just an awkward classmate. He was a highly calculated threat, patiently stalking his prey. The chronological reality of the final night finally crystallized for the investigative team. In the early morning hours of June 26, the heavy metallic click of the stolen master key echoed in the dark landing. The lock turned smoothly, completely betraying the heavy wooden door meant to keep intruders out. McDaniel crossed the threshold, stepping silently into the quiet apartment, while Lauren slept in her bedroom. The physical distance between safety and extreme danger vanished in a matter of seconds. He ambushed her in the total darkness of her own sanctuary, cutting off any chance for her to call for help. The promising law student, with her entire life ahead of her, met a brutal, permanent end on the floor of her apartment. He then utilized his acquired tools to systematically dismantle the evidence, attempting to erase her existence entirely. Following the overwhelming accumulation of forensic proof, authorities formally charged McDaniel in July 2011. The local police transported him to the county jail, locking him away in a small concrete cell. During the intense interrogation sessions, detectives laid out the massive volume of digital and physical evidence on the table. They presented the camera, the stolen master key, and the recovered internet searches detailing his exact methodology. The sheer weight of his own extensive digital footprint completely destroyed any possibility of a viable legal defense. The arrogant law student who believed he could outsmart the criminal justice system sat entirely defeated by his own documented arrogance. The terrifying realization settled over the community. The monster had lived right next door, hiding his true nature behind a quiet facade. His arrest brought an end to his immediate threat, but it left a permanent scar on the historic neighborhood. The judicial process moved forward with slow, methodical precision over the following 3 years. Defense attorneys initially attempted to suppress the vast quantities of digital evidence, arguing technicalities regarding the search warrants. The presiding judge firmly rejected these motions, ensuring the complete scope of his digital stalking would be presented in open court. Facing an insurmountable mountain of indisputable proof, the defense strategy completely collapsed. McDaniel recognized that a public trial would ultimately result in the most severe punishment allowed by state law. In April 2014, he stood before the judge and formally pleaded guilty to the highest charges presented. The courtroom remained entirely silent as he admitted to his horrific actions in a flat, emotionless voice. The family of the victim sat mere feet away, finally confronting the individual who had actively destroyed their future. The judge swiftly sentenced Stephen McDaniel to spend the rest of his natural life within the state penitentiary system. Under the specific terms of the negotiated plea agreement, he retains the possibility of parole after serving 30 years behind bars. He was transported to a maximum security facility, trading his vast legal ambitions for a permanent, highly restricted existence. The tragic loss of a brilliant young woman forever altered the landscape of the Mercer University community. The case forced property managers across the city to drastically overhaul their security protocols and master key systems. Lauren Giddings is remembered by her loved ones for her immense warmth, her profound dedication, and her bright, enduring spirit. Her story stands as a chilling reminder of the hidden dangers lurking in the most seemingly secure environments. This horrifying reality of a predator manipulating the media leads us directly to our final thoughts on these deeply unsettling investigations. Each of these cases demonstrates how deeply predators can manipulate the language of grief and cooperation to stand inches away from their own crimes. It leaves us with the deeply unsettling question of how often these deceptive acts go entirely undetected. Thank you for watching. Click the video on your screen for another dive into the unknown. When predators wear the mask of grief or helpfulness, they exploit our empathy to hide in plain sight. It leaves us to wonder how many others currently walk among us, inserting themselves into the tragedies they caused. Thank you for watching. Click the video on your screen to explore another case.